morning, everybody, and thank you all for coming out. It's an important work session that the delegation has put together, and I want to thank the delegation members for being here. As everyone may know, the legislative session started on last Wednesday, and it's an incredibly busy time for the members. There's a lot of demand on our schedule, but I think it's an indication of how important we see our schools, the children's education, that issue, that we wanted to have this meeting and have this discussion. This will be, for me, the last time I'm going to be chairing the delegation. Because of some new responsibilities in the legislature, I'm sort of stepping down, and also because we've got some great new senators, and in particular, Senator Lamb will be chairing his new chair starting on Monday. So, just a little context on this, and then a quick little description of what we're going to do today. I think everybody knows there was quite a discussion all through last year about the Public Facilities Ordinance, and school redistricting, and fees, developers, and taxes. And the reality is that, from my perspective, there are no sort of simple solutions. And when I say solution, I guess the first thing to do is try to even define what a solution is to and what we're trying to solve. And clearly we want schools, quality schools, and primarily we're talking about right now from a physical nature, that we have the space and the ability to provide for our students. Getting that and getting it in a way that it works for our communities, for our neighborhoods, for our parents and the kids, I do not believe it's simple by any stretch of the imagination. The data, from my experience over probably nearly 30 years of working in this area since I first started as a staffer on the county council, has never been perfect. The fact that there are multiple players involved with multiple responsibilities and no single entity that drives the bus on all of this, as it were. All of these things make it incredibly complicated. And you throw into that the demands from our community and our desire to meet those demands, our desire to meet changing demands of reduced class size and new programs and programmatic changes that we all want to have because we all want the very best for our kids. So you throw all that together, and I think we find ourselves in I believe, a complicated place. I think to start off with, I know people have indicated that there may be solutions or partial solutions that they support, and I think the delegation, and certainly myself and the delegation probably as a whole, supports this, increasing some fees and doing this thing. But my fundamental belief is that we're a community. And I don't like the idea of pointing fingers of who's not doing or who's doing this to one another. I think it is our responsibility as a delegation, as elected officials, that we come together and we figure out the best solution. And I'll say at the outset, I don't think there will be a perfect solution, but the best solution for the most, and hopefully we'll get there. So that's sort of the framework that I see this in. Today we're going to have essentially 3 presentations. We're going to start with folks from the County Department of Planning and Zoning, and we're going to hear about the Adequate Public Facilities Ordinance and their involvement in the process of all of this. Then we'll hear from the school system and redistricting. And then finally, we're going to hear from the Director of Policy and Programs for the County Executive's Office about fees and taxes and how all that might come together. We've also asked folks, or told folks, that are going to be here today, and I know that there are folks from various entities, and we haven't asked them to present, but we're glad that you're here, and should questions arise the delegation feels necessary to ask at this point, we'll ask you to come up. I guess with all that, we can probably get started. I don't know if you have anything else to add. The co-chair. Yep.
I just wanted to add one thing, which our Senator Zoni's really explained the process, but we also want to be clear that this is not in any way disrespectful, all the work that went into the APFO process in the last few years. It actually is just a realization that a lot of people, officials and citizens have put a lot of time into this, and we're just trying to be respectful of the fact that when it came to us last year, there really was no consensus, and it wasn't really clear, and we could have just voted something and walked away. But I think to Senator Zoni and Chairman Zoni's credit, he understood that we actually need to put some elbow grease into this and see if we can come up with a solution that will allow us to move forward and hopefully for at least some period of time stop us from having to keep reinventing the wheel on a semi-regular basis.
Thank you. So I guess we should probably just, again, as we normally do, just quickly let the members introduce themselves who are here. And as I said, there are a couple who I think may be missing, maybe we just wanted to, but like I said, this is a very tough time for all of us in terms of scheduling. So I very much appreciate you all being here. Delegate.
Warren Miller, District 9A, Western Howard County and South Carroll County.
Frank Fiddleman, District 9A.
Courtney Watson, District 9B.
Katie Hester, District 9.
Clarence Lamb, Senate District 12.
Eric Eversole, Delegate District 12.
Jennifer Terrasso, Delegate District 13.
Jessica Feldmark, Delegate District 12.
Good morning, Delegate Vanessa Atterbury, District 13.
Okay, great. So we're going to start off with Jeff Brumhout, who's the Chief of Research Division in the Department of Planning and Zoning. Yeah. Okay, great. Awesome.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here this morning. Sorry about that. Good morning. My name is Jeff Brownell, Chief of the Research Division in the Howard County Department of Planning and Zoning. One of the things that the Research Division does is administer APFO. So my intent today is to give an overview of 3 things related to APFO. I'll try to use your time as efficiently as possible and try to go through a complicated process as efficiently as possible. The 3 things are the purpose and history and the reason for APFO, the description of how APFO law works in terms of its development and its effect in development of public infrastructure, and third, talk about recent changes to the law that went into effect earlier last year and the impacts of that. Feel free to ask questions as I go along if I'm not clear, if you need further clarification. So, to begin, briefly, APFO is tied to the comp plan, which is a general plan that's adopted every 10 years in counties across Maryland, including Howard County. Howard County's had 6 general plans. The last plan is known as Plan Howard 2030, which was adopted in 2012. And it really is primarily, among other things, but it's primarily a land use plan, and it It includes growth projections, housing unit growth projections, and APFO is tied directly to that comp plan. So as we go through APFO, you'll see that it's tied to the general plan and the growth policy of the county. The general plan really is sort of a guiding document of land use in Howard County. And from that, you have functional master plans like the capital budget and other types of departmental plans like the parking plans, water sewer plans. So the growth projections are in the general plan. And for example, when the water sewer plan is updated every 3 years, they utilize those growth projections. So all the county government entities utilize these growth projections to plan for the future, including the Howard County Public School System. We work very closely with the school system, and we provide our projections to them every year, every December, to update things annually. The implemented regulations from the general plan are the zoning regulations and the subdivision and land development regulations and APF regulations. So APF is a component of growth management. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it's an important part of the growth management plan. The capital budget in particular, which is one of the functional plans, is a 6-year capital plan that's adopted by the county council and the county executive every year. And it covers all of the infrastructure in the county moving forward over 6 years, including schools. And of course, all the other infrastructure like roads, police, parks, libraries, etc. The capital plan is based on the general plan and is based on the APFO projections. And it's coordinated very closely with APF. And so you kind of see that sequence. You have the general plan, which is a 10-year plan, and then you have the APF regulations, which are tied to that, and the capital plan, which is tied to APF. So they're all related, and it's important to have kind of everything together and functional in that sense. So a quick history of APF and how it started. So this is a chart that shows growth, the number of housing units in Howard County since 1979. So you can see in the 80s that we had a lot of housing units development, 4,000 housing units a year in the late 80s. And so, and actually there wasn't much, there was only one school built in the 80s for whatever reason. I don't know what that reason is, but there's only one school built. And so things were a bit overcrowded in Howard County. So the 1990 general plan began, and one of the policies that came out of that was that the county needs an APFO. And also around the late 80s and in the 1990s timeframe, APFOs were starting to be introduced all over the country as growth management tool. So Howard County created its own APF, and it was adopted in 1992. And you can see what happened after that. It basically slowed growth considerably in Howard County. So the 1990 general plan had projections and it limited growth to about 1,500 units per year. And then in the 2000 plan, the growth projections were updated, and the decision, actually in 1990 it was around 2,000 units per year. And then in the 2000 plan, a decision was made to reduce it to 1,500 units per year. And so you can see that reduction based on the growth management, and then it allowed the county to provide for infrastructure over time. This is a chart of the last 10 years of the last chart, but it also includes what's happened since 2010. So you can see about 1,500 average. Since 2010, growth has increased a bit on average, and the primary reason for that is that in 2010, the county adopted the Downtown Columbia Plan, which is considered to be an amendment to the general plan. And so the Downtown Columbia Plan added units in Downtown Columbia, and the general plan was amended, the growth chart was amended to create a Downtown Columbia pool to add more units. So there's extra units for from Downtown Columbia. Plus, I think some of the units probably came from, there was a slowdown at the end of 2008, or end of 2000, the 2008 recession. And so some of the units have carried over as the economy recovered. So we're at about 1,700 units per year. It's important to note that things are changing in Howard County in terms of types of units being built. So this is that same chart, but what it shows is the type of units being built, broken down between single-family detached homes, townhomes, and apartment and condo units. So you can see in the 2000s, there was a lot of single-family homes. You can see the kind of the decline in the number of single-family homes, the blue column, and the increase in apartments and condos. And that's really a result of land use, what's remaining in Howard County in terms of where development can occur, policies that were adopted as part of Plan Howard 2030 and rezoning that occurred to allow for mixed-use development in higher density areas. So that will really be, moving forward, the future of Howard County, there's going to be more apartments and condos and less single-family detached homes and townhomes. And that's just based on land use and based on policies that were adopted in the county. And a large portion of those are in the Route 1 corridor and also downtown Columbia. So to talk about how APF works, okay, there's basically 3 tests as part of APFO. There's the allocations test, the schools test, and the roads test. We're going to talk about each of those moving forward. The allocations test is conducted at the initial plan stage of approval. So the way planning works is the developer would submit a sketch plan, followed by a preliminary plan, followed by a final plan, followed by a site development plan. It typically takes about 3 years of planning and construction before all of the units are built in a subdivision. So APFO was designed back in 1992 to test at when the first plan comes in. And if there's no allocations available, then that plan is put on hold. So the allocation chart, as you'll see, is always 3 years ahead. The chart adopted by the county is always 3 years ahead. And allocation is equal to a housing unit. I should have said that initially. So one allocation equals one house. It doesn't matter if it's a townhouse or a single-family detached house or an apartment. After a plan gets allocations, it then takes the schools test. And you can think of allocations test really to manage for growth in terms of all infrastructure, to kind of, slow growth, pace growth, so we can plan for future infrastructure, parks, roads, police infrastructure, fire, etc., and schools. And then the schools test is sort of a secondary test that the school district can't be overcapacity.
So with regard to the allocation, when you were talking earlier about the 1,500 and then the bump up for downtown Columbia, does that mean that 1,500 allocations are all that are available in any given year?
Yes, that's what that means. Right. Now it's a little different now, and I'll show a chart. I'll show the current chart in a bit. So it's higher than 1,500 if you include downtown Columbia. I'll explain that in a minute. So that's what that means. Whatever that means is it's capped, and if more plans come in that have more than 1,500 units, they're put on hold. Yeah. So then once a unit gets an allocation, if it doesn't have allocations on hold, but then it's tested each year because a new annual allotment of allocations, so to speak, are available. Then they take the schools test, and they'll talk about that in a little bit more detail further on. But basically, the schools have to be under capacity for the development to move forward. And the last test is roads, and roads doesn't stop development. It basically allows for the developer to mitigate the impacts from traffic and road impacts. So they have to do a traffic study, and then they have to pay for new road infrastructure to address impacts, such as adding a left-hand turn lane or providing the signalized intersection, things like that.
But those are necessary. When you say it doesn't stop development, it stops that particular development until it's actually paid for.
Exactly, yeah, the developer has to do that as long as they pay for it or move forward. So to get into a little bit more detail about the allocations, it's based on Plan Howard 2030. I mentioned that before. And allocations pace development, so county government can plan for and provide for capital facilities. Now each year the county council adopts a new allocation chart, and that chart is based on the general plan projections. So they have to adopt it, and the numbers can't be changed because it's got to be based on the general plan unless it's a general plan amendment, which happens from time to time.
Question.
Okay.
I wonder, in planning you have an allocation, what about, for one example, if you have a child's lot on the farm that has been allocated, is that counted in so they could be prevented from building if the allocation wasn't given?
So there are exemptions built into APFO, and that's one exemption. So it specifically says child lots are exempt in the rural west.
And what about people who own their own individual lot?
Right, if you own it, it only applies
Question wasn't that.
Yeah, so it only applies, it only applies to subdivision. So if there's a lot that's existing, then you have the right to build a house on that lot.
Thank you.
So here is the chart, the APFO allocation chart that's in the general plan. And these are the numbers of what's available each year, about 2,000 units per year. And you can see the downtown Columbia pool was added in 2010. Prior to that, it was 1,500 units. And each of these pools are really based on policies. So for example, the county has a policy to promote environmentally sustainable development. That's the green neighborhood pool, 150 units per year. Most of the allocations are what's in the growth and revitalization area, and then followed by established communities. And I'm going to show a map that shows these areas. So this map, the kind of the pink color is the growth and revitalization areas, and that's the 1,000 units per year, 1,200,000 units per year. That's policy where the county has decided to concentrate growth, and the zoning matches that. So along areas of the Route 1 corridor, downtown Columbia, each of those stars represent a village center, Maple Lawn, Turf Valley. So basically, where revitalization is intended to be. The county doesn't have much vacant, undeveloped land left. And so the growth and revitalization concept is really to provide future growth in those areas. And that's based on general plan policy. It's also tied to the state growth laws, state planning laws. The reason that the county kind of has this set up now, and you'll see in the past it's been a little different, is because the state has adopted growth management laws, and it has required counties to kind of incorporate these areas that you see on this map. So what this does, this is live information, but, oh, yeah.
Thank you. So going back to the allocations and going above the allocations when extra allocations are permitted, is there a max on extra allocations? And kind of, could you give a framework if you can, like what would allow for an extra allocation?
So when you say extra allocation, there's no really, once there are no extra allocations available.
So when you say,
I think you're referring to the question over here about the individual lots.
Oh,
How many of those happen a year?
Right.
This is the question. Is that what you're going after?
yeah.
Delegate Russell.
Well, just to clarify, so I think what might be confusing to some folks who are newer to this is that when you look at how many permits, residential permits were granted, that's significantly higher in some years than the number of allocations. So it might be helpful, is that correct, if there's some years where I see, like there's one with 2,000, that's the highest one, 2,475, which is
Right.
obviously higher than the number of allocations. So it might be helpful to understand that just the allocations is different than when you get your, when you can, or whether
Right.
when you do get your
Yeah.
permit, and also that those allocations will
Right.
roll forward if they're not used.
Yeah, that's a good point. And as I mentioned before, allocation are granted initial plan stage, kind of looking forward 3 years. But the reality of the market realities occur, and so the timing isn't perfect. So if you have something allocated in year 1, not all of those will be allocated in year 3. So some years actual development will be a bit higher, some will be a bit less. I mentioned earlier, I think, in the 2008-2009 recession, that a lot of allocations expected to happen then, but then the recession happened, and so they didn't happen then. So there will be fluctuation, but on the initial chart I showed, you could kind of see an average,
Right.
what happens over time.
But when they weren't used, they didn't go away, right? They rolled forward. I think that's part of the issue is that,
Right.
so if they're not built that year, they're not, or the allocations aren't granted that year.
Well, I think it's two different things. So if the allocations aren't granted, then they roll into future years. That's true. And so if allocations aren't granted, then the unused allocations can be rolled up, averaged out over the next 3 years. That's a little bit different
Yeah,
than
than the
the
permits.
permits, exactly, yeah, exactly.
So there's both. There's the allocations can be higher than what the chart says.
Mhm.
So that would be what
delegate out of there is talking about. And then there's also more permits could be issued in there.
Okay. And what's kind of happened, if you look at the, and I don't have this information, but if you relate it to what you're saying, if you look at the history of APFO, in the late 90s, there was a lot of unused allocations. And so the roll forward kind of kept going up and up and up. And then there's the General Plan 2000 that kind of knocked everything back down again. So that tends to happen, and it's happening right now. Growth is sort of slowing, and there's unused allocations out there. So the allocations that are adopted by the county council is increasing each year because they're not being used. And I would say allocations are of less importance now than they used to be. Just if you look at the data, it's more, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Let me ask another question, excuse me. So the allocations roll forward for 3 years, and then what happens with those excess allocations?
So they're either used, or every year there's it's called a 3-year rolling average. So if they're not used the next year, then the excess get rolled forward the next 3 years, and it kind of continues on.
And what drives the allocations? Is it just what developers are requesting, or how does it feed to the capital plan that's configured every, worked every 6 years, or how does that work in the comprehensive?
It's really what requesters,
I'll ask the question again. What drives the allocations? You mentioned that the capital plan is reworked every 6 years, but the growth projections are done every 10 years. And I'm trying to get an understanding of whether the allocations are simply based on developers' request or how it actually feeds into those other two planning instruments that the county is using.
right, so the used allocations are based on the developer's requests. In the 90s and the 2000s, the developer requests were a lot higher than what the available allocations. So like in 1990, the general plan said 2,000 allocations per year. And then in the 2000 general plan, they dropped to 1,500 allocations per year.
Okay.
In that time period, the requests were always higher than that. So there was a lot of projects waiting until the next year to go forward.
So let me get a little bit more basic.
Okay.
Developer asks for so many allocations, what are the standards or that the county uses to say yes or no?
If they're available. So basically,
Being available based on the growth projections that were done every 10 years, or based on the capital plan, or based on what? How is determined whether we
Right.
meet the request?
okay, so every year the county council adopts an allocation chart which says, okay, this year in 2021, we're right now in allocation year 2021 because the last chart was adopted in 18 years. Let's say there's about 2,000 allocations available. And that adopted chart was based on the general plan projections of about 2,000 units per year. So it's derived from that. And then during the year, the whole year, developers come in with projects and based on those pools I showed. And they utilize those allocations with subdivision plans. And once all of those are used up, and the next plan comes in and says we want 30 more units, we say we're not going to process your plan. You're on a waiting list until next year.
Okay, so then I'm going to let you go on.
Okay.
Is this circular? In other words, there are growth projections that are done in the general plan every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Aren't those growth projections in part based on what we think developers are proposing to do?
I see what you're saying, yeah.
And then we agree to what the developer's proposing, and we based our allocation. I mean,
Not necessarily, because the county made a conscious decision, the county council and the county executive at the time made a conscious decision to reduce the number of allocations to 1,500. The demand was a lot higher then. So reducing it to 1,500 was actually below what the market was coming in at.
The general plan sets the rate. The general plan sets the rate and pace of growth. That's where it begins.
based on what?
Based on, Jessica?
The policy discretion of the council.
Right, so based on,
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole it's an extensive process. So I was involved in several of these over the years. Yeah. There's a few of us who've got to go through this. But no, it's an important question, and you're absolutely right to ask it. In particular, the 2000 was the one that I was most involved with as a member of the council. But It's a whole host of things. And by no means are general plans perfect, if you will, but you bring in all the data that you can possibly do, economic data, and then you start talking about what matters to the community, the types of housing we want, what makes sense. Do we need affordability levels? Everything you can think, social services, everything you can possibly think about in what makes a community good. And all of that is in there in some capacity. And you try to pull all that together and make sense of it. It's again, not perfect, but it's the best attempt to try to say, this is what we want our community to look like. And it's a guideline for the future.
And it involves, starts out with a huge citizen committee, and it works over the process of at least a year, several public meetings, and it's also based on what the county planners believe the infrastructure can hold, can accommodate. So there's a lot of things that go into it.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question, because there were two categories that I think got discussed as exemptions, and I'm not sure they're both exemptions. So the child lot on an agricultural parcel is an exemption from allocations, but when we're talking about an individual lot, unless that lot predates APFO, am I correct that it's not actually an exemption, but in fact the allocation was used when that lot was created,
Right.
as opposed to when the unit is built?
That's correct.
So it does have an allocation, but it always not.
Or if a subdivision was subdivided, 10 years ago.
Right, it would have been many
10 years ago, and it wasn't, if you got its allocation at that point, then it was built upon. Yeah. That doesn't happen very often, but yeah, that's true.
I just, like a clarification, I don't understand, Michigan Downtown Columbia a little less, but growth and revitalization and green neighborhoods, what are those?
So growth and revitalization is in areas of the county, the pink areas. The intent is to areas of the county for redevelopment and where to put high density mixed housing primarily. Not everywhere in those pink areas, but where the zoning allows for. There's a lot of commercial, for example, in those areas. But where the zoning allows for, there's policy decisions to revitalize the Route 1 corridor and to allow the opportunity for mixed-use development along the Route 1 corridor, for example. Other areas of downtown Columbia, that's considered a significant growth.
And I noticed green neighborhoods.
The green neighborhoods can happen anywhere in the county, so it's really not tied to that map, but it's based on a criteria subdivisions need to come in and they need to be in green subdivisions. So they have to provide for environmental features and things like, and also on the building side, things like rain barrels and water saving features. So it was intended to provide the incentive. So, for example, if all the allocations are used up. So this chart really shows the history of APFO. So it was adopted in 1992, the first year, 3 years ahead, 1995. And all the red closed is any time during the year when that area was closed to development. So it shows how the law was effective. And you can see the last year was the first time no areas were closed. And I mentioned that before, that allocations aren't being used as extensively as they have in the past. On the three different kind of segments of the chart represent the three different general plans and the policies in the general plan. So that when the APFO first started, they follow those areas up there, Columbia Beach, et cetera. General Plan 2000 got a little bit more complicated, and you can see on the right of that section, policies were enacted by the county councils to do various things like add a pool of allocations for moderate income housing units. And that started in 2009. Green Neighborhood started a year later. Downtown Columbia, 2010, it started, so 3 years later, 2013. The Route 1 corridor was considered to be a place where there's a 250 unit set aside for the Route 1 corridor. So there's a lot of amendments in the 2000s to the general plan. And the last general plan is based on these areas that I talked about, based on state planning growth laws, et cetera. So kind of to get into the schools test, which is the second test, This test is taken after a plan has allocations. So let's say it was on hold, and then the next year it gets to move forward. It has to take the school's test at that time. If the schools are closed, then it can't move forward. And there's 3 tests associated with schools. There's elementary district test, elementary region test, and the region is basically a kind of a composition of 6 or 7 elementary districts. The thinking along those lines was that if the districts within the region might be under capacity, or a few of them might be under capacity, but the region as a whole is over capacity, then the project still can't move forward because it's the regional impact. And then the third test is the middle school district test. And the percentage of capacity is 115%. So based on the school chart that we get from the school system, and I'll explain that in a minute, if the school capacity is less than 115%, projected to be so in 3 years, then the project can move forward. If it's not, then it's on hold. The middle school test was added later on, like around in the 2002 or something like that. I'll talk about recent changes near the end of the presentation. You must pass all 3 or go in the waiting bin, and you can be held up for 4 years. That's important. So projects can be on hold for up to 4 years to get retested each year. So when the county council adopts the allocation chart each year, and it's typically in July, they also adopt what's called the open-closed school test, or it's now called school capacity test. Or chart, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Would that also apply to, for example, a senior building in which no children would be added to that system?
Very exact. Senior housing.
Very simple. Are there anything else? What about commercial facilities?
Commercial is exempt from the school test.
Okay, so it's just residential.
In determining capacity, is there a consistency in whether we're using federal numbers or state numbers or local numbers in terms of estimating per square foot? Is it based on the number of units and how many children per unit the developer is projecting to have? Where are we getting our projections?
Yeah, I mean, I think the school system could probably address that, but it is applied consistently, and it's based on mostly local data. Standards based on empirical, evidence, like school yields and things like that. So if a project is held up, they get retested each year. If it's held up for 4 years, they get to go no matter what, because you can't hold up a project indefinitely.
Question, so there's no high school test? There's no test for high schools?
There will be, and I'll talk about that, how the recent changes did incorporate a high school test.
Okay, so you just said that if a project is held up for 4 years, they get to move on no matter what. So does that mean even if the elementary school, they don't meet these tests, they still get to move on?
Yes. And that hasn't happened that much, actually. Usually,
Explain why that was done like that.
right. So the reason it's done that way is because, the government does not have the right to prevent somebody from utilizing their personal property. They have the right to, and this is through court cases and things that have been historically, challenged over time. At the time in 1992, that was adopted. I think it was looked into, and it was determined that 4 years was a reasonable time, or acceptable time, to hold the development up to manage for growth in the future. Anything longer than that would be an undue takings, and it wouldn't be legal.
I think the court, I think the interpretations all along since then are a little bit up in the air. But that was the best thinking at the time, and that was a reasonable thing to keep us, the county, out of court cases. I think court cases went up theoretically up the line, so that's why we chose it.
Let me ask this question. What is the point, and what happens in that 4 years? You're failing the test, you're failing the test, you're failing the test. So I save money if I make the adjustments and I can start sooner. But other than that, what is the point of the test if I can move forward even with the project no matter what?
It's really time. I mean, APFO is designed as a growth management tool, so it gives, county and state government time to plan for and to build and to fund new infrastructure.
So the theory was that 4 years is plenty of notice for a county to fund, plan, design, and build.
So we're not really holding a project, we're just trying to catch up.
Manage growth.
So the question then, are you saying, someone had said that most projects are not held up for those 4 years, they don't run into this problem? And that's is that because the schools then step up to add more schools in these areas to fill that, or how's it that most projects do not run into this issue?
Right, and I don't have that with me now, but I think we looked into that last year in the APFO debate. If you look over the history of APFO, the number of plans that have been held up for full 4 years is very small, like less than a dozen, and maybe even less than 8. The reason is because the county has built new schools, the school system has redistricted, and it's basically accommodated growth through this planning mechanism. So there might be times where where developments were held up for 1 or 2 years, maybe 3 years. But for those that held up the maximum 4 years and then got out anyways, wasn't that many or often. And it's actually happening more frequently now in the last 3 or 4 years than it has in the past.
So that was the intent, that it's actually working that way?
Yes.
Okay, if that was the intent, and it was.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you get us that list?
Yeah, I can try to put that
In the
together.
years.
Okay, sure.
And why is it happening more in the last 3 or 4 years? Is that why we're here now?
Well, so that's interesting. But it's happening more. I think it's certain areas, certain districts. I have to get the data, like what comes to mind, and I have to look at everything. But for like Dunlog Middle School, for example, there just happens to be several developments in that middle school, and I think there's an addition required, and the priorities have been switched. That addition has sort of been kind of put off each year. Ellicott Mills Middle School comes to mind as another area.
And when was the last time the school system redistricted when there was not a new school being opened?
That, I don't know. They usually redistrict when schools open. Yeah. And so each year, I mentioned this, they file a new school capacity chart and projects are retested. This is important. So the chart is created by the Howard County Public School System. They do utilize our growth projections for housing. They also have a very sophisticated growth model that includes all the other reasons for growth, such as birth rates, resales of existing homes, apartment turnover, and just the normal cohort survival as kids progress through the school system, 5th grade, 6th grade, et cetera. So they have a very sophisticated growth model. Housing projections are included in that. They come up with a chart that is adopted by the county council. And this is the chart. This is the, so there's no way to see. So I'll go into that. So this is the elementary school chart. And it's the 40 plus elementary schools. It's a 10-year chart. Currently over 115% schools are closed. So you can see the red with the C means closed. So it looks like there's 8 schools closed currently.
Is this on the, in the internet so that we could print these out big enough to read them?
Yes, they are. It's always a 10-year chart. The APFO chart also is a 10-year chart. The reason it's 10 years is because some projects are phased. Some of the larger projects are phased, so they're phased over 4 or 5 years. They're tested in each of those future years.
Yes, I'm going to sort of cycle back to the question. So I remember, for instance, when the original plans in downtown Columbia for the current development were going on, there was discussion about whether there needed to be a new school, and there was some discussion and claims made by the developer that there were not going to be any kids that needed to go to school initially because they weren't making units for that, which I always found really interesting, that you project who's going to get your units. And then there was some other discussion, well, if so, there will be enough they can be sent somewhere else. when you all do these projections and hand it over to the school system to approve, and you say they're going to be X number of kids, is that solely based on the developer telling you, we think that our units will house 3 kids on average, and we think there'll be no children here? How do you decide what those numbers?
Right, and again, that's probably a question for the school system. You're referring to the, like, yields, how many students come out of each house. And they can probably get into that, but it is by district, so it is pretty sophisticated. So they, based on empirical knowledge of what's happening. And so, for example, downtown Columbia, the yields are very low of the number of kids coming out of those units. A lot of the new housing in downtown Columbia are studios and 1-bedrooms. And there's not as many 2-bedrooms and 3-bedrooms. So there are children coming out of downtown Columbia, but very low. And so and also the unique thing about downtown Columbia, the plan actually calls for school planning. So we were, through the plan, required to work with the school system to come up with a feasibility study to deal with the school impact specifically in downtown Columbia. And we've gone through that, and there's the downtown Columbia can't move forward until there's agreement with the school system on school sites and such that the developer had to turn over to the school system, and that was accomplished last year. So in downtown Columbia, there's actually a pretty strong plan to accommodate schools within the children that are going to come out of the units in downtown Columbia. They also have to take the school test. So if the school district in downtown Columbia is projected to be closed, that project will be held up too. For 4 years, correct.
Well, I think that process, as you noted, was that we've already moved through that, and there's not going to be a school site in downtown Columbia, is my understanding.
I think the Board of Education
That's going to
agreed. Yes, that's a question. They agreed to a site that's not in downtown, but it's next to downtown.
It's next to that. Okay, we can discuss that.
So I'm looking at the regions test, and all the regions are green right now. Have they ever been red?
Yes, they have.
Okay.
In fact, I think
So we're just at a place right now. They're all, many more than half of them are predicted to go red as a region, about 5 of them.
right.
7.
Yeah.
So there's no particular trend there. I mean, they're all open right now.
They're all open right now. There has been in the past where regions have been closed, but right now they're open.
Okay.
And this is the same chart for middle schools. So same thing. There's four middle schools closed, or 3 middle schools closed. Even though that region is closed, there is no regional middle school test, but they're only tested on the district level. And I think you can see Ellicott Mills and Dunlawton, which I mentioned, are the 2 plus Marino. So this chart really, again, like the allocation chart, this shows the history of the impact of school closures. It's a lot to kind of absorb, but if you just focus on the top line really in red, that is any given year the number of schools closed. So back in 2004, 5, 6, there was a lot of schools closed in the mid-2000s, 10, 14, 12 schools closed. Now there's 8 schools closed, elementary schools closed. You can see that there was a change when APFO was first passed in 1992, it was 120%. And then it was moved to 115% in the early 2000s. The reason that happens is there's APFO committees that are convening, the county executive committees, APFO task force. And that they review the law to see how it's working and make changes based on that. And then this is middle schools, so you can see it, four school max was in the 2016-17 timeframe. And you can kind of see what I mentioned there. So Ellicott Mills, look how long it's been closed, and Dunlawton's been closed. So, when you say projects are held up longer than 4 years, it doesn't happen very often, and it's sort of targeted just for whatever reason. That's just how it's happened in Hamilton County because of the capacity for that region hasn't been addressed.
Just noting that, and this is also probably when the school system comes up, but another thing that changed was the capacity of the schools. The school system changed how many students.
Right, and I'll talk about that. Yes.
Yeah.
This is a very good point. And this is the last set of numbers chart, really. So what this tries to do is show how many housing units have been held up in each year due to APFO. So it really shows you that growth has been slow. These units are held up for either by failing the application test or by failing the school test. And so in the 2000s, there was a lot of units held up. Now, it's important to note that, for example, like in 2009, the 3,200 units, those aren't units that would have been built that year. A lot of these big projects are phased over time, but any development that came in would take the school test, which is shown as that number of units being held up at that time. Right now, there's 804, as of last year, 804 units held up, either due to allocations, or actually in this case, all school. You can see at the bottom left, no projects held up for allocation. That's why I said it's less important right now. So kind of takeaways to wrap up. So APFO has worked with slow growth in areas of high demand. New infrastructure can be planned and paid for and built with the known 20-year growth pace. APFO has granted some relief and given the school system extra time to plan, redistrict, and build new schools. So there's actually been 26 new schools built since APFO began. About one new school per year. So a lot of school capacity has been added. And it's really a three-legged stool, those three things. And if one of the legs isn't functional, then the stool as a whole isn't functional. That's planning. So you plan for growth, you have foresight, you have a general plan that's adopted, you know how many units are sort of anticipated to come. Redistricting is part of the puzzle. You need to try to balance and use efficiently the effective infrastructure. Of course, that's challenging, as we all know. It competes with other policies and criteria and objectives for student education and student well-being and family and community well-being. So it's always a big challenge. And then, of course, the last part is funding and building new schools. So it's trying to balance all those three things.
I was just curious if you had any historical data on the redistricting process, like when the redistricting occurred and how many students were impacted. It'd be great to see a chart kind of like in parallel to what you just showed us.
Right, yeah, so I don't have, the school system has that, so. So some considerations, and this process mentioned this, second bullet point actually. So the first bullet point is, it's not perfect, right? So if there's high birth rates or yield rates for whatever reason, then you can't, new development's not good. Stopping new development, controlling new development would impact that. I remember when I first started the county, Pointers Run was overcrowded, and people kept saying that there was something in the water because the birth yield was very high at that time. So there's different things that impact school crowding. And turnover of existing housing, which is becoming more of an issue. I'll talk about that in a second. The second thing, and this is what Mr. Ross alluded to, there's been a lot of changes in levels of service, so reduced class size. So I think that in the 90s, the decision was made to reduce class size from 25 or 26 children in first and second grade to 19 children in first and second grade. That adds a lot of capacity. So while,
I will just suggest that that's not necessarily happening. I have a child in kindergarten with 25 kids, and my first grader, there are approximately over 25 kids in this class, so I don't know that that's right. Say ditto to that. Although my kids are a little older now, that's certainly true. But I think my point was also that if the number of, and maybe that's complete, maybe that is the same thing, but the number of students that the school system says can be in school, 13, whatever it is for high school, if they allow for more students, then it's not over capacity. All right, so the same number of kids are in the school, but now it's not at 115, 120%. It's at,
yeah, again, that's a question for the school system, but I think they have fixed capacity. I don't think they move the capacity up.
And they may not do that yearly, but I know over time that has, and again, it's kind of hard because we're having conversations, and I'm sure some of the folks look like they'd like to answer, but I know that's no. Some of them would not.
And then another example is all-day K. It used to be half-day kindergarten in Howard County, and then they phase over time all-day K. That's doubling, obviously, the need for kindergarten classes. And I mentioned that APFO addresses impacts from new development only, can't control for existing housing turnover and programmatic changes. And that's kind of a topic that's been debated for many, many years. The concept of housing turnover, it's a very difficult thing to think about, really. There is a lot of new students coming to the Howard County school system currently from the turnover of existing houses. You might have had a neighborhood, an older neighbor in Howard County that had schools in it for 20 years, and then the progression of the families aging, the kids moved out, and then so there were homes with, no children in them, empty nester type homes. And then that neighborhood will turn over. So that school that served that neighborhood, there might have been a redistricting to fill that school up, right, with kids kind of from maybe different areas. But now that neighborhood's turning over, and so if things are over capacity again in the neighborhood, and it's about 60%. The school system tracks where children come from, either new housing or existing turnover, and about 60% of the new students coming to Howard, the school system is from turnover, and 40%. So that's the other thing that's important to take into consideration. Just a few more things. It works well as a tool to plan for new schools. What's happening now is there's a need for more and more capital dollars going to renovations. Howard County's middle-aged schools are 30, 40, 50, 60 years old. And so a lot more of the capital budget is actually being spent for renovations of older schools. And this is a chart put together. It was presented, last year and the year before during the APFO debate. And this was discussed quite a lot. And, more than 50% of the capital dollars passed and projected are expected or needed for renovation. So, recent changes to APFO. So County Executive Fiddleman convened a task force in 2015. Task force recommendations and DPD technical staff report was submitted in 2016. The bill forwarded to the Planning Board and County Council in 2017, and then the final bill was adopted in early 2018. And its effective date was April 16, 2018. So the changes of that bill, the biggest change was this, that lowered the capacity utilization rate for elementary schools from 115 to 105%, lowered it for middle schools from 115 to 110, and then added a high school test at 115%. The bill built in sort of a year delay for this, so it's effective this July. So the school chart that comes out this spring from the school system will have these new capacities in it for the first time. There's other significant changes, or not quite as significant, other changes, and I won't talk about that now unless there's questions about it, but this is what the task force came up with, to really try to address some of the issues that in the APFO law, try to make it better. Yes.
What was the rationale, the plus and minus of the existing modern income housing units for moving allocations?
I think it was really based on the goal of the county wanted to support and enable modern income housing units.
So what does that, how does that affect our true numbers and our ability to project?
Well, it makes it harder. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that just for allocations, they still have to take the test for schools. So modern income housing, they still have to take the test for schools.
And for roads?
And for roads, yes.
I just had a question back on page 6, simple thing. That's where it shows the allocations and the map next to each other. The rural west is in green. And then there is this category on the map called low density, and it's not on the chart, so I just was trying to figure out what what map has that's white.
You're referring to this chart?
Page 6.
Is that this the map you're referring to?
Yeah, this
Yeah.
and the chart before.
So, everything west of that big line there, kind of the green and light green area, is
Yeah.
considered the rural west.
Okay, so the low-density area is just a sort of
Yeah,
subdivision that goes under the same criteria for the rural west?
yes, yeah, those two are combined. It has to do with zoning.
Other questions?
So, well, thank you very much, Jeff, for coming in and sharing your Saturday with us. A lot of memories. And flashbacks. I might have a hard time sleeping tonight. You know, I wanted to say, just because it sort of came up toward the end, and I actually made, in my opening comments, a little remark to this about policy decisions and the significance of that. I actually was very much involved in the 19-1 decision. And at the time, we were told that if we did that, it would be the equivalent of 4 new elementary schools in terms of construction. And that's both a, we also, at that time, in that era, raised the piggyback tax significantly to pay for a lot of things. And I can remember distinctly having X's across my face in the newspaper saying, "Stop Chairman Gazzoni from raising your taxes." But all of these are the inherent, and I say this to the delegation, all the new elected members, the school board, the county council. This stuff is where the reality comes in. If we want to build a great community, we have to think of ways to pay for it and how to deal with that and be willing to do those things. If we are going to reduce class size, I mean, having gone through that and to hear at least the anecdotal evidence, and we'll hear maybe from the school board about the actual conditions that we may not be at 19-1 on those early grades, after what we went through to get there, that's disappointing to me in and of itself. You know, as we think about what's going to be the impact of what we saw with full-day kindergarten and preschool and all of that, and all these policy decisions, we really have to be careful about it because they are real. They sound great. The public wants it. We want to do it too. We think they're good additives to our society and our community, but we really need to think very hard as we move forward. And that's the old guy saying he's seen this. Hopefully we'll continue, hopefully make some really good decisions in the near future to have those good things for our community.
So, then one quick question for Jeff before he steps down. So this map up here that you're showing, it seems like most of the eastern area of the county will be closed based on the new projected restrictions that are in place. Is that correct? But this is also based on the fact that it's not accounting for any new schools that would potentially be built or redistricting that might occur, right?
So what this map shows the effect that's going to happen this July when the chart goes into effect. Most of the county will be closed to development, primarily because of the new high school test and the lowering the capacity for the elementary school test. We did a kind of a projection of land use capacity in these areas, and about only 25% of the units would be able to get through. So about 75% of the kind of the planned units that's tied to the general plan and adopted by the general plan will not move forward. So this is kind of a fundamental shift. It sort of goes away from the planning we've had in the past. And so there will be a lot of development on hold in Howard County. And the effect of this might be that developers won't even decide to try to come to Howard County to build their home. So this is a big, kind of a big issue of change from the history of that three-legged stool sort of working coherently together.
So there's some urgency to try to resolve some of this issue because you're saying this takes place in July this year, right?
Right. Yeah, in my view, there's some urgency because it is not necessarily sticking to the policy of the adopted general plan.
Yeah, first of all, thanks again. Could you get us these information on what allocations are in the queue when this goes into effect? What, in other words, which ones are 2 years in, which ones are 3 years in, which ones are 4 years in?
Yes.
And where they are, so we know what's being stopped and won't be stopped as of.
Right, I can provide that. Since it's not in effect yet, and I have a current list of what's on hold, but when it's in effect, a new list will be developed. And then, I don't know, this is important, 2 more slides. So last year's Study and Affordability Advisory Committee recommended that a fiscal impact study be conducted to understand the fiscal implications of the reduced growth and the change from Plan Howard 2030. The Study and Affordability Advisory Committee was convened around the time that the County Council was debating this and made the APFO law changes. So that fiscal study is currently being conducted by a company called Urban Analytics. We expect that the draft results are going to be applied in February and the final report in March or April. And it really shows the fiscal implications of the changes to the general plan growth projections.
Thank you very much.
Well, that felt like a whole work session, but now we will have superintendent and your team and the chair of the board. Madam Chair, welcome.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Mavis Ellis, and I'm chair of the Howard County Board of Education. On behalf of the entire board and school staff, I am happy to have this opportunity to speak with all of you regarding a number of topics. Over the last year, the previous Board of Education worked with staff to address community concerns regarding the redistricting process. We approved changes to Policy 6010 that improve that process. After several months of study by staff, community, and board, the board adopted a plan that balanced multiple factors of capacity, new programmatic options, and new capital projects. The process is already underway as staff develops the 2019 projection. We have already done considerable work, and staff is continuing the planning process. The new board that was sworn in last month. At our meeting earlier this week, we all voted to add boundary line changes for discussion at our meeting on January 24th. We have provided a binder for each county council, delegation, and Board of Education member. If you are in need of a binder, please raise your hand so that staff may get you one. In this binder, there is information regarding the planning considerations from the board's policy, which includes the redistricting process, our capital program needs, information on the relocatables, and our deferred maintenance. Anyone who is interested may find much of this information on our website. Dr. Martorano and his staff will now review the materials that have been provided you. Following their presentation, we will be happy to address any questions you may have. So at this time, I ask Dr. Martorano to come forward.
Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, and thank you, Ms. Ellis. And there's a rumbling back in the back about all the requests for binders. This will be on the website, and we will have that information very soon in that sense. If I appear to be vibrating, I am, because every child in Howard County is pinging me on Twitter wanting to know about the impending snowstorms. Decision that is there, and yes, snow is coming.
It's only 7 minutes.
Parents want to know too, everywhere I go, that is a question right now, so I hope you received your bread and milk this morning, because there is none available in Howard County. Good morning and congratulations to all of you. It is an honor and a privilege to serve with you. It's our first opportunity together to talk about this extremely important topic. My goal today is to be extremely instructive, being a teacher at heart. All of you do have a binder that is designated with tabs, and I'm going to be referencing several of the topics throughout. A number of the questions that were posed previously. There are items of documentation contained in your binder, class size reports, and I'm going to move through this in a very didactic way, quick way, and then try to get to the essence of your questions if I can. And any materials in which you need, we will provide, but we've provided an incredible amount of information, including in the appendix both my first feasibility study that I delivered as soon as I arrived, and then the second feasibility study as well that outlines a lot of the processes. So first and foremost, understand what's in that document. I want to start off with some highlights to understand that one, we are the fastest growing school system in the state of Maryland. And that's critical to understand as I interface with the state agencies and our county agencies regarding this particular topic. We are adding approximately 1,000 new students each year, and we currently are sitting with 58,000 young people in our 77 schools of which we have. I also want to state, as we were talking about class size, the class size report can be found on page 138, and as a good teacher, I would prefer if you would just listen to the highlights first, and then you can reference those later on. It has all the detail on our average class sizes, etc. But one of the pieces of mythology is that people use hand in hand is that when we talk about overcrowded schools, overcapacity schools, that does not always translate to overcrowded classrooms. We still have a class size report, the policies of which we have to adhere to fidelity. That is dictated on page 138, and that class size was just delivered to the Board of Education at December 18th based upon our September 30th enrollments. We provide average class sizes, and then we provide the actual for each individual school down to the classroom level. And if there are aberrations in that and adjustments that need to be made, one of the things in which we really value in Howard County is that my operating budget contains what is defined as full positions to address those swings in enrollment, and I'm making those decisions on a very regular basis, and that's something I know I'm drifting outside of the topic today, but I'll be advocating strongly to preserve because I'm one of the few superintendents in the state of Maryland that has that option, and when we do have an aberration in terms of growth, I'm able to deploy a teacher during that hiring process, and we do that every day. Secondarily, regarding that, is that these are management issues that I think you need to be aware of from my vantage point of superintendent. Regardless of the crowding situation, I still have to manage schools and manage all of this every day. So one, the mythology regarding overcrowded schools don't translate to overcrowded classrooms. And then secondarily, I know we have great discussions about relocatables. We currently have 222 relocatables in our school system. We've had them 30 years before, and I don't see any time in the near future which will eliminate those. And I'll discuss that, how much that would cost to eliminate those relocatables. But we have 222, and I have reallocated those in a way that if you look at policy 6010 and our target utilization of 90 to 110%, all of our schools are below 110% when you allocate relocatables, because the capacity is defined by the brick and mortar footprint of a school. And so understand that as I manage, I have 222 relocatables. I still manage the class size policy, but we do have overcrowded schools. But this is how we're management, and that's the management tool which we're doing. The other thing of which I want to provide in terms of a highlight is that we just opened Hanover Hills. Now understand, we are not going to open another new school until 2023 that will provide great relief for our capacity and our growth. We will open up Talbot Springs, which is top on our priority list for a replacement, which will not add great capacity. But as I've adjusted during my tenure, our CIP, our next school does not open until 2023, and we find ourselves in this very heavy law. And I'm just absolutely gobsmacked by that, because the fact is we should be opening a new school every year for the next several years. But we find ourselves in this law, which creates a great management problem. So understand, is I'm talking about the issues of relocatables, I'm talking about class size management, no new school coming on. The only tool that is left to my disposal, working with our board, is redistricting. And so as I move through this detail in regards to it, understand that the process of redistricting, if it were decided today that we are going to redistrict, that is a process that will not have any opportunity to effectuate that change until the 2021 school year. It takes a long process for that to be implemented. So I want to frame that by saying no matter what our solutions are, and I'm delighted that the Board of Education will be discussing this soon, in order to effectuate that, the earliest of which I could do that would be 2021 school year. And then the other piece that I want to throw out.
So a quick question about why are we in this lull? Is this inadequate support or resources, funding, past decisions by prior boards? Why are we in the lull right now?
So I'm very political as well. I'm going to say all of those and more. You know, in that sense, I find myself dismayed in terms of, and there's reasons for all of this. Don't get me wrong. I'm not pointing fingers. But the piece is that we find ourselves at this juncture with this problem. And so my job now is to provide ourselves a forward vision to say where those new schools need to be, whether the funding exists or not. I've added as a top priorities Talbot Springs, Hammond High School, and the reason why Hammond has continued to fall behind based upon the renovation is because capacity was overriding renovations. That has been a consistent philosophy for years, and so I tried to be very efficient by adding capacity at Hammond High School, and then we've added it up as a priority because state funding is based upon capacity and needs, not always based upon renovations. So those drivers, and when you look at the fact that we've opened 26 new schools since 1992, we've been moving at this fast pace. But we find ourselves now at this lull in this accelerated way.
And let me just clarify why I was asking, really because I think it was important for us to kind of get a sense of how we ended up in this situation to kind of frame how we can move forward to make sure that we don't fall into this, not the cat's playing like folks in the past.
Just a quick clarification, because it's just a year, but it is a year. When you say 2021, are you saying the school year 2020 to the school year 2021? Are you speaking of the school year beginning in 2021?
School year beginning in 2021.
Okay, great.
In that sense, so that the
When I say 2021, I
expectation,
was like, you know.
why there is an urgency right now for me is the fact that the board just voted at the last meeting. If we don't begin this process now, there is a whole series of planning, defining attendance areas, communication with our community, all of those things that have to take place. You just don't redistrict and say, guess what, show up here. Bus routes, etc., financial, and all of those things will come out in the presentation, but I'm more than happy to answer questions along the way as many as I can.
Delegate Miller.
So I appreciate the fact that I'm not in your shoes, in the board's shoes.
Thank you very much.
There are a lot of concerns all around, but one thing I want to interject, it sounds great in your school year, but sadly we have a lot of aging school infrastructure throughout the county. It's not a regional issue. And I certainly hope that this new school year thing doesn't strip funding from maintaining our existing schools, where there has to be a balancing act that goes on.
Yes, sir. And as I continue my presentation, what I'm here today is to reveal all of the issues, being brutally honest, about the issues of which I've inherited. And one of the issues is deferred maintenance. And the question that was posed as I've been talking to individuals in terms of planning this is how much would it cost to eliminate relocatables, to deal with all of our deferred maintenance, to build all of the schools of which we need to build to take care of our capacity. And the astonishing number is close to $2 billion. Just to eliminate all of our relocatables alone, to eliminate those and provide brick and mortar structure would be $150 million of capital outlay. We find ourselves at this juncture with with $500 million in deferred maintenance and adding on to that with the new schools. It is an extremely heavy lift. And so when we talk about why certain projects didn't move forward, oftentimes when I define that one-year CIP and things adjust in the 10-year CIP, I look at the outlay, is based upon available funding. And the fact is I throw all these things out for individuals who are new. I live and breathe this every day. we are sometimes a victim of our wealth based upon state funding. So based upon all of that, I believe our shift is about 90-10, you know, in terms of what we have to pay for at the local level versus what the state does. But my brothers and sisters in Allegheny County, that's completely shifted in terms of what local is in that sense. So the money available oftentimes is on the back of the local taxpayers in that sense. So a very viable point that I'm not taking my eye off of.
Superintendent Marano, could you just clarify again, are you saying that you would, even if you started now, January of 2019, that you would not be able to redistrict kids until September of 2021?
2020, 2021 school year. So but it won't happen for the, what I'm trying to make the point is the 1920 school year, which is next. We won't have an opportunity to do that. The next opportunity which I have is 2021, and the conversation that occurs with this board is critical.
Because it's about a year-long process, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks for the clarification.
So, I appreciate
And
it.
I want to thank the board for taking that action, and I appreciate that you're beginning to be looking at it soon. So I personally say I appreciate it.
Can I just ask one clarification question? Dr. Marano, I think you said you gave a number of over $2 billion.
Yep.
Can you just recap what that included? It was $500 million in deferred maintenance, $150 million to replace the relocations.
So off the top of my head, I'll have our staff give a more delineated approach. There's always great conversation about relocators. I said that we have 222, and I'm thankful that we have those at my disposal to manage our class sizes and to manage the growth. And we can debate optimal versus, in terms of the instruction, I can talk about that. Just to eliminate those would be $151 million. Scott will address the other issues regarding deferred maintenance, the other maintenance issues of which we have, and then the new schools of which we would need to offset the growth as well. So it becomes a very large number that we have to manage in terms of available.
And so since you're talking about new schools projected for future growth,
Right.
what is the time period represented by that $2 billion?
So that is, when I was asked the question, what would it cost, that would be over a 10-year period. And the other issue that I want to throw out into the public domain, even if there was a arrival of an incredible amount of money right now, and said, go build a school right now, Mr. Superintendent, as many as you need. It takes us 3 to 5 years to build a new school. So I'm throwing all of these things out, not as obstacles, but ways we manage all of these issues, because I get a lot of noise all day about why aren't we building faster, how about this, etc. The decision for the Mission Road site that I was extremely ramped up on was, in fact, we needed a high school site, and we needed it now because of the planning process that has to go in that 3 to 5 year process. And we've got it defined in the CIP for the arrival of that school in 2023, and that's hoping that everything goes smoothly in that sense. If I can, because I think the richness of the dialogue is in the questions, there's one major point that I want to make before we continue, is that when I arrived to the school system as acting and then interim and then permanent superintendent, I quickly implemented a feasibility study and introduced it, and everyone remembers that. It goes to the question, I believe, that Ms. Watson asked, when was the last time that we've redistricted without opening a new school? And I believe that was in the 2011-2012 era as well. We'll get into that in more detail. But one of the drivers was opening Hanover Hills, but I also looked very comprehensively. If you remember, that study revealed that I would move 8,800 students. And I want to take us back to that. According to me, I'm asking the board to consider that, because that's still alive and well. I still see that as a solution, moving 8,800 young people south, east to west. And there was an incredible amount of community engagement that yielded a certain number of being moved, and also entered into the dialogue programs that we had at Jumpstart. But do understand the final piece, the programmatic issues were never defined as a way to avoid redistricting. it was a way to provide me another safety valve during this lull, as well as then advance additional academic programs. So it was a two-pronged approach. But that was not the primary issue. And so most recently, we were offering additional programs that just do not have the interest, because people would rather stay in their schools and address the issues of the overcrowding, as opposed to be enticed to leave. And we have evidence of that now, and all of our programs, for the most part, are pretty much to capacity in that sense. So understanding where we are, your binder contains all of the documentation, and I don't want to sit here and read and be preachy, but instructive, and give you the highlights. And I think the most instructive piece would be to answer your questions.
Doctor, let me ask you this question. You talk about $2 billion number. Does that address this question of whether we have low capacity in the west, so if we actually did redistricting and shifted students over, would that be a slightly different number if we shifted the schools over? And does it also address the change in the schools test that we'll be seeing this year?
Would you let Mr. Washington answer that?
Good morning, Scott Washington, Better Capital Plan and Construction. The $2 billion actually what we call an optimum number. Meaning if we could actually do everything we need to address your issue, address concerns we have with new class in the future, take care of all our systemic maintenance and all the systemic deferred projects, that's where that number comes from. It's based on our long-range plan that's actually presented in our FY 2020 budget. I'm sorry. It's based on our FY 2020 long-range plan that's based on the budget. Basically, that number starts at about $1.2 billion. That's already documented in the folder. But then we also had to look at the operating costs and deferred maintenance from our school facilities, as well as you did list also earlier, Delegate Miller, that there is a number of, items or projects that move out systemically. That's bringing those projects back in. I can provide that list as well. So to actually take care of all those projects that were deferred further and further out because of budgetary constraints, to take care of new capacity, to actually get rid of portables and actually put brick and mortar so you don't have those, as well as address your issue about capacity, that's where that number comes from, and we can break that down and share that.
Just to follow up, because I didn't think I heard exactly the answer to the delegate's question. So if you did 0 redistricting over those 10 years, or if you did some element of that, how does that affect that number?
Actually, like I said, basically right now, the number exists in terms of what's already been submitted in our CIP, meaning what you already have right now, which is what we're looking at, just with the budgetary restraints we have with the capacities as they are. That's in that number. Deferred maintenance on all of our schools as we sit currently right now. That's in that number. Taking care of all of the capacity issues we've identified to date, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Cannon, that's in that number.
I'm sorry, taking care of the capacity
Issue that have been identified.
by adding brick and mortar, or taking care of the capacity by redistricting to move into underutilized facilities? That should affect that number, right?
Yes, the second what you just said.
I think the question is, does the CIP anticipate redistricting to use available capacity?
Yes. That's yes.
And growth.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Great.
So, in terms of the overview that I've provided, the next steps that I'm looking forward to is during my tenure as superintendent, I've done everything that I can possibly do right now as far as programmatic issues, adjusting the CIP, introducing a feasibility study that moves individuals from east to west. And I'm asking at this point, and I believe that there's a clear understanding, that a unanimous vote from the board for the reconsiderment of that process and thoughts as we engage in this. The other thing that I'm also looking at is the other districts, because we're not the only one who is growing, to understand and build credibility regarding our projections and the need for our schools, looking at consultants to add to the dynamic of which we do to support our efforts, and knowing that these are hard decisions that disrupt community because of their allegiances to their particular schools. But at the end of the day, I can give a level of confidence of management for at least the next year or two using programs, relocatables, but the numbers continue to go up, and knowing that I'm on the law with schools in terms of building, we're going to be finding ourselves at a juncture where we have no other option except to reconsider the redistricting decisions and making some tough decisions as a community. And I think we're all going to need to support that effort, because as our community has extremely, and I'm going to be extremely honest about this, has extremely strong emotional ties to their communities and schools. I have found that in many cases that many of our parents would rather keep their child in an overcrowded school, even when we have offered ways of open enrollment, or if they wanted to move out, or if they wanted to engage in other programs. We still don't see people who are flocking to the school district based upon those options that are available. And the emotional attachment is strong, but at the same time, I have to look at those capacity issues and making the decisions so that we look at the open and closed chart in tandem, we look at where we are in terms of our class sizes again, and that we look in terms of our ability to build new schools in the future.
Dr. Martirano, let me ask you this question. You mentioned some restrictions that the state imposes in terms of funding and that kind of stuff. So as a state delegation, if you had your wish list, what kind of changes would you like to see, whether it's addressing the capacity versus infrastructure rules, or what changes would you like to see in how state funds are allocated and what you're allowed to do with state funding?
So again, I'm just using this as family time. So I know there's a crowd behind me, and so thank you for listening. This is very therapeutic for me. Thank you. And so this is cathartic. So thank you for asking and allow me to be impassioned in this response. When we walk into the room, there is not great sympathy for us. There's a feeling that you're from Howard County, and you're in the land of milk and honey, and money falls from trees. And when I ask for money, I can hear my peers snickering. I made a very impassioned plea at one of our state meetings seeking funding through the process, and had an incredible amount of information about our growth. We're the fastest growing county in the state. These are the number of new schools of which we need to add, and it fell on deaf ears. Because at the end of the day, if certain things aren't met in terms of the formula, because it's all formula driven, any opportunity to accelerate a project has to come from forward funding of local dollars. And again, we are victimized, and I say that as a result of our success. And so I can point, and I'm not going to call them out right now, where I define as inconsistencies of the formula and allocations in other jurisdictions when I feel consolidation should have occurred of schools, schools should have closed, but yet funding formulas and wealth have created some decisions that I just didn't understand. So my plea is, as you are talking to the individuals at the state level, what variable and factor is given to schools and school systems where we're experiencing robust growth? We're not like every other county, but I'm treated like every other county based upon how the funding is allocated. And so there was great consternation and noise just around the Talbot Springs project. You know, I wanted to add this, I wanted to add additional growth seats, and there was great conversation back and forth on that. Good news is it's moving forward, but it will not add an incredible amount of growth. It's still a top project to move forward. So those are the things that I want you to know that I encounter from the management point of view as I'm up against funding formulas, et cetera. And somewhat the same way in terms of operating money as well.
Delegate Kittleman, and then ask you after that to ask the question about capacity, different formulas dictated at different levels.
So I think what we just heard is that we all need to go down there and start complaining about poor Howard County instead of saying we're the best, right?
It's alive and well, trust me.
Yeah, I suspect it is. I have a bit of a different question. It's sort of more philosophical than anything else, and I know that you are in a position where Howard County residents are very, very strongly involved and care a lot about schools more than anything. But most of the things we're talking about here are inputs. They're not really, well, do we ever look at outputs? In other words, let me just use the example of the fairly hated, what do you call them? Not travelers, relocators, thank you.
Learning cottages.
I do a lot of SCHs, and when I go around, I find most of us actually really like the relocatables. They're neat, except that you have to go outside to whatever. But I guess I'm interested in looking at whether or not that particular thing helps or hurts the education of the kids involved. That is an output as opposed to an input. And other things that we look at, are they important in helping the children learn? And I think the thing you just said last is another one, if we could be flexible, because is it better to move a kid and hope that they can, I don't think it's, I have 5 kids, and 5 grandkids, pardon me, in Triadelphia Ridge, and they would have been affected by what you were doing. A lot of it depends on the kid as to how well they can tolerate change, and I don't know, and you can tell me, can there be any individual thoughts and negotiations just to make sure that we're doing the best thing for all the children?
So I appreciate the question. And if you remember my comments at the beginning, I said, this is how I am managing. And these are the tools of which I have at my disposal. One is to make sure we have those class sizes at the level. And the only other really management tool that I have are the 222 relocatables. And putting them strategically through our district, which we have. And so if you look at that chart, I can say that with relocatables, all of our schools are below the 110 utilization. Some even below the 90%. Is that a reason to keep relocatables? No, as we move down, but it's a way of managing. So I have to look at qualitative and quantitative.
That's an input. I'm talking about whether or not the kids can learn.
Yeah, so let me continue. There's qualitative and quantitative data to support. There is no distinction that I can present that says this classroom, because they're in a relocatable, are doing any better or any worse than children in the classroom setting. In many ways, I've had conversations with our teachers who like being in relocatables. They like being in that process of an isolated environment, not have to worry about the noise in the hallways, et cetera. And I've heard that time and time again.
Like this instead of like this.
Yeah, exactly. So that vantage point, I've been in many of them across the area. But where it plays into are management issues. So for example, Howard High, our largest high school, they have an extremely large modular of relocatables. But when they come into the main school and the hallways are tighter, there's great congestion within our hallways. It has bearing regarding management of cafeteria. It has concern regarding how I manage gym, PE, and music. It has bearing now for me, and I need to throw this into the public narrative, in terms of safety, that we've had conversations about being vulnerable in our relocatables, and there's been conversations in the event of an evacuation that they're not contained within a brick and mortar structure. And that causes me great consternation as I lose sleep over a lot of things. So these tangibles could have a bearing, but there's no direct quantitative data to support that there's any dip in the delivery of the instruction that's occurring in a relocatable versus not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, thank you for being here. I appreciate you being here, and you all have a huge job in front of you and the board, so I appreciate that. So my comments are always a mix of, trying to see what we can do at the state level to help manage it, but also as a parent. And so you just touched on some of a question I was going to ask, specifically related to playgrounds and gyms and cafeterias, and being in a safe space in relocatables, just because a lot of the work that I do is related to gun safety and what's going on. And I have to tell you, I 100% appreciate, I get these emails, it's a shame that we have to do them, but Fulton is on top of, shelter-in-place drills, and, I know when they happen, but it is concerning a child's safety in those situations. And also, I'm concerned about congestions in the playgrounds and in the cafeteria, and that all children have access to the outdoor time, and that type of thing. So that's my first question. So I'll let you comment on that.
And I think I'll repeat what I said. Those are real issues that schools are managing every day. Your children, I don't want to announce to where your children go, but you just did. I'll talk about that specifically. But our overcrowded schools that have a larger number of relocatables have to deal with things that other schools don't. Howard High administrative team sat down with experts in the arena of traffic management and flow of young people through the hallways. And if you're carrying an instrument, a large instrument, through the hallways, say for example a tuba, that's going to cause great concern as you're trying to navigate the long hallways between classes. And it could create more challenges with children not having access to equipment, providing less time on task in those other areas. So they're great concerns. We are managing that. I think it goes back to Delegate Kittleman's question, not at the expense of academic achievement, but it's those other issues that cause me concern. I'm going to just put it all out there. The larger the school, there's oftentimes less opportunities for participation in plays that only have certain parts. Athletic teams, I've heard over and over, homecoming events at some of our high schools. So these are the residual effects of not having the optimal level of enrollment that our principals have to deal with, in addition to focusing on what is their primary job as instructional leader of that school.
If you could also touch on what is your role and the school board's role in terms of connecting with the county and projections and how you project the student population will be from year to year. The previous presenter talked about, I think he said 60% of the student population comes from turnover homes as opposed to new development. So can you talk about, and I think Delegate Hill touched on, how do you know how many children are going to be in an apartment and all this high density that's going on? So how do you make those determinations?
Off the top, in terms of my introductory comment on that, it's a very symbiotic relationship. Well, we can't do this in isolation. So there's great coordination and conversation back as we establish our projections. And there's a whole process for that as we look at resales, as we look at new homes, as we look at a variety of things that go into that as far as how we come up with the overall projections and define the need. I think there was a question earlier about that there are different numbers for different things as which we operate, statewide capacity, local capacity, and all of that has to be morphed together in the overall process. It does create confusion for community. I will tell you that because I will report my enrollment numbers in one report that don't include pre-K. And so you'll see numbers within your document that don't have pre-K, but will have then the K through 12. So I can give you detail and have individuals provide that, but we have to work interchangeably as we look at open and closed chart, as we look at the implications for APFO and decisions that are made regarding that.
So I think you are very high level. I just want to know, do you go into a neighborhood that's turning over and knock on every door and see how many kids are in the house? How is it done for those of us who have no idea?
I will be doing that tonight.
Because quite frankly, depending on who you talk to in the community and in the county, you're given different answers. One answer is that, all, like we just said, all the children are coming from turnover, and not a lot of kids are coming from, I think we heard at one point, 1.1 kid was allocated to an apartment or something. I'm making that up, but that just sounds ridiculous. So I would like to know how that determination is made. Hi, Renee.
Hi.
We were mommy friends before all this drama began.
Yes. Good morning. I think we're still in the morning. My name is Renee Kamen. I'm the manager of school planning. My role is the demographer for Howard County Public Schools. Our projection is a very complex projection, but it looks at the past student yields that come out. So it's an annual process. We collect data from the Maryland Department of Health. We collect data, housing data from the county. We use our own school system, and we put the children on a map, and we tag the children as to how they come in, so they could come in through a resale. So in your binders actually is a large scale, it should be in the front of your binders, is to how our projection is actually made. We take data inputs from our cohort survival, so these are the students that year after year are within the system. We take a look at the birth rates, that's information we get from the Maryland Department of Hygiene, and we try to project out the number of students that are children that were survived from birth to kindergarten. In addition, we look at our resale data and how many students come out of, new students come out of resale. And we collect all of this data, we aggregate it all up, and it comes into a projection. We don't stop there. Then we collect our September 30th information, and we see how accurate we are at the school level and the system level, and then we adjust for the following year. So it's an art and a science. There are some nuances, but our projections are actually based on 5-year historical data that we collect. So that's why you kind of get those weird yields out of like 1.1. It's because not every unit necessarily will have a child come out of it. And so that's an average of what we would see at a unit type.
How close are your projections turned out to be?
So at the countywide level, we're highly accurate. We're about 99.5% accurate in our data. Down at the school level, it varies because we do recognize we have a very hard time with migration flow, turnover. So we can be anywhere, our goal is to be 95% accurate. In general, we can be off in our projection anywhere between 10 students or 12%. And so anytime we're off higher than we want to be, we dive down into the numbers and we try to figure out what exactly happened, you know, because sometimes there might be more resales and students coming in than we anticipate. So we look at those numbers to adjust over time.
Okay. Senator Hester, you come all the way along here.
Thank you all for being here. I appreciate your passion. I have two questions that relate to what you previously said, Dr. Marano. The first was, you had mentioned that you tried a lot of kind of optional programs to get parents to move their children out there. And I was curious if you have any data on that could be sent to us.
What time is that?
We do. Understand that it's in there and we can go through it in detail. Goes back to my philosophy, says I've introduced the programs in terms of one, academic achievement, but also to address growth, but never as a panacea. We stabilized some of those schools. Some of them we saw a dip in, but not in terms of enough that we can continue that growth at that level. But that data is in here and we'll provide the tab for you.
Okay, thank you. And the second part to my question was, if there was an existing building, not necessarily building a new school, but maybe using a school that had been closed or something like that, and that was an optional like magnet program, how long would it take? Like, could we see any relief to the next fall class if that were on the table?
Well, we don't have any existing buildings that I could turn over in a quick period of time, but I'm throwing into the narrative, again, the academic achievement level and things that I think we need to do to be prepared for the future. For example, I'm throwing back into the public narrative again, Faulkner Ridge. It sits right, I drive by that every day from where I live in downtown Columbia to the Board of Education. And I look at that every day, and it drives me, quite frankly, insane. Because of the fact that's a place for a school, things that we can do, and it sits in a targeted area where I have a number of young people that have unique needs in terms of poverty, etc. I've thrown out for a conversation in terms of long-term vision, the development and the establishment of a 9th grade academy. Looking at our 500 young people, because we know the data tells us the greater time for when young people drop out of school is at the 9th grade area. And there's several programs I've used in my past that have been extremely successful. So if I took several hundred of our 8th rising 9th graders and placed them in this school with the intent of making sure they receive the number of credits to advance, that automatically starts looking at a different programmatic model, but provides relief. So things that you're talking about as far as magnet programs, there's a whole subvision about those kind of issues. The second one that I've advanced is the thought process, and again, all of these cost money. We have a site available that's right in the targeted area, Faulkner Ridge. A secondary thought would be the establishment of a very robust career development center, CTE program, Career Technology Center, that we could utilize in the day, but then also if the county resources were there, turn that into a workplace development center for dislocated employees to get retrained using all the equipment, using taxpayer dollars at the ultimate level. And again, that would be the expansion of our ARL program, which we're very proud of, but there's only so much capacity, and there's different delivery models if you look at it from either a signature program or a magnet program development. But these are things that we have not introduced at a robust level in Howard County that need to be done, as I look at a 10-year vision for this county and school system as we grow. But again, it's the proverbial dollar that creates an issue. So the conversation with the delegation, the council, the county executive, and the board becomes very clear in this: where are our priorities and how will we address those? So those thoughts are being looked at, not in addition to other magnet opportunities or signature opportunities at the elementary and middle level that could start this movement that addresses this in tandem.
Let's go ahead, Randy. Lots of conversation, lots of questions.
I had flagged earlier, and this is actually a question going back to the capacity discussion and capital budget discussion. And what I wanted to clarify was that it took me a minute to find the number in the capital program that you gave us in the binder. It looks to me like we're looking at a 10-year total of about 1.2 billion in that, right? And so I just want to clarify the numbers we talked about earlier for deferred maintenance and eliminating the relocatables. It sounds to me like that's the gap that gets you to over 2 billion and is not currently planned.
That is correct. The 1.2 is the baseline.
Right.
That's the baseline for the 10 years. And actually, to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Marwan just said, in that $2 billion, we're looking at the advancements of those other programs, because remember we said optimal.
Right.
So looking at optimal in the 10-year stretch, that high school, that light grade academies, those things are things we'd like to include if that was to happen.
I guess what was concerning to me,
Sure.
and I'd love to hear your comments on it, as I looked at that and discovered particularly the 500 million in deferred maintenance. When deferred maintenance keeps being deferred, it goes from optimal to critical.
Sure.
So what's the plan for that 500 million if it's not part of the budget proposal?
Gotcha. Actually, well, first of all, I think you have to, not Mr. Sadie can speak to some a bit more detail. The deferred maintenance is looked at two ways. Number one, as you said, it's deferred maintenance, but a lot of times, and there also are what we would call systemic capital projects that some of them are already in our CIP. So what I mean by that is the fact that until it actually becomes a project that moves forward, it's a part of the maintenance. So he's maintaining it until we actually take it on and move it forward. So with that being the case, that's a part of what makes up that extra gap. And then you add to that money for the relocatables, and then you add to that the due incentive money, and that's how you get to the $2 billion. Exactly. And in terms of how we take in systemic issues, and once again, I'll let Mr. Saturday address that. But again, he continues to address those projects as briefly as we can until they move over to the capital.
So that's addressing them in the operating budget.
So there's great, so I have to use all these opportunities. There's great conversation right now about my operating budget. And again, I want this delegation to understand that I inherited this system that was in chaos. And we had to address issues in front of the county council in 2 days to restore dollars that were going to affect students. The second year, we were stabilizing the school system with our healthcare deficit and other issues. I'm very uniquely positioned this year to define need, and it is a need-based budget. Contained within there, the recommendations of our board and the OBRC, our committee in terms of our budget, that I've added close to $19 million to address deferred maintenance. So some of these issues are defined, but again, that's just a drop in the bucket. But I deal with that on a very regular basis, and Delegate Miller was also talking about this as well. It's critical. We put this in initial outlay for dollars, and then we're not keeping up our abilities to where they need to be, and it does get to the level of critical concern. Go ahead.
Good morning. I think it's still morning. Herb Savage here from the Director of Facilities. Sorry about that. Is that better? Talk deeper? Okay. Louder? All right. Basically, what we do is we have about 100 staff members on our facility team. And so to answer the question about deferred maintenance, the projects that are deferred that do not get into the capital budget every year, such as a boiler or such, we don't have the money to replace a boiler. So we'll take $20,000 and pull the boiler apart, sometimes with our in-house team, sometimes subcontracting it out. But we'll replace specific pieces of that with large equipment, and that'll give us another 3 to 5 years, hopefully, to get funding to replace the boiler at that time. But we're doing that constantly on different pieces of equipment, different systems, HVAC systems and things of that nature. So we're doing the best we can, keeping things together. And like the superintendent said this year, the ask is to get us caught up based on a 4-year projection of what we're looking at. Operating, we're about 35 million, 36 million in deferred maintenance. And that's above and beyond the other deferred, which is capital.
My questions are back on the capacity issue, and I guess they're for Ms. Kamens. You were saying that countywide you had 99.5% accuracy, on school level, I think you said 10 students to 12%. So 12% is the most you've been off?
12% is the most we've been off, and that typically happens in our attendance areas that are highly high turnover. We have children coming in and out of the system literally daily, so that's usually where we have the most difficult time.
Okay, and can you give us that data? In terms of
Sure, actually, we provided a projection accuracy report for 2017 on January 24th. I'm going to be providing the board our 2018 projection accuracy, so it's not yet out. Is it out? That's 2017. Sorry. So that all the data by school, our projection misses are all in the attachments for you to see. So you can see for our 1-year accuracy what we projected versus what came on September 30th and the error or the error that came plus or minus. On average at our school level, we're anywhere between say 2% error to about 3% on any given year, because our projections are influenced things by the economy. If there's a recession, people tend not to move as much as in the good years where people will move quite often. Any kind of land use decisions that might increase or decrease the amount of availability to build.
So my understanding from Mr. Bruno was that the numbers that are used to figure out how many students will come out of a particular project, those come from you, is that correct?
The projections come from us.
So and is that is there one number for apartments, one number for?
There's a number, yeah, there's a number for each type of unit by attendance area. If that particular unit does not exist in the attendance area, we flip to the countywide 5-year average for whatever unit type that might be. We do not project by development, we project by attendance area. So there's a little nuance of that. Our projection can't handle that. Our software can't handle that type of detail. So we collect, say, all of the new construction for all of the attendance area. We use our 5-year historical. If there is a historical rate for that particular attendance area, we apply it, and that application then plus all of the other pieces of our projection get put together for the total of that school attendance area.
So is that done by elementary, middle, high school?
It's every school and every level. and we aggregate up. So we add up all the projections at the elementary school, for each elementary school, and then add up the total projection, what we believe is going to happen by level. So that happens all of the schools, with the exception we do not do a projection for our centers. And we do K through 12.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand is if somebody's going to build a development, an apartment complex with, I don't know, 200 units, and Mr. Bronow gets the number from you, you're telling me that number differs for every school district? Both?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, some units perform different, it performs differently. It also depends on, it could depend on the age of the unit, how big the unit is. Like with downtown, he brought up downtown development, you know, there's only studios on one bedroom, so you would typically not see children coming out of those, so it varies.
That's the type of unit. I was talking about, you're saying...
It does vary for each unit, for each attendance area.
So there's, written formula, how can we get that information?
It's spread out all throughout our projection, the sheets that we use. So I could provide the 5-year average for new construction by unit type, if that's what you would like.
Just the last little piece of that. I guess what I'm getting at is I hear a lot from folks, and also from my past 12 years of experience, where it's the number, I think Delegate Atterbury threw out was like the 1.1, and I think people are skeptical of whether that actually bears out. Like you say, there's going to be 1.1 students per unit. Does the county go back to see if that's correct? Do you go back to see it correct? Because you said you don't do it by project, but you're giving a number to the county for a project. So we're actually going back to verify that.
So we don't do it at that micro level is what I'm saying. We look at the attendance areas, so the performance of the overall projection. So it's something I don't think has ever been discussed in my office, to look at the accuracy of the yield, because we adjust that yield year to year based on what we're receiving from those different data points.
When the school system's looking at the accuracy of the yield from a particular project.
We don't do that because we don't do project by project yields. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a handful of questions. We're going to try and make them short. But we come back to the relocatables, and you really drill down the fact that it's really not necessarily a pedagogical consideration. It's a much more safety consideration. Some of the high schools I know have sort of pods or full modules with bathrooms. Are they, first of all, do they ever get counted as part of capacity, and are they safer?
No. They are not counted as capacity. So understand a major takeaway is when we talk about overcrowded schools, it is the brick and mortar footprint of that school.
Yeah.
So that when we're talking about Howard High, and I say, here's where we are, I believe it's at 133% capacity without relocatables. When I add relocatables into it, it's below 110%. So know that piece. So second, it's never considered a capacity. The issue for me is not necessarily pedagogical, because there's no evidence that supports that. And the concern is vulnerabilities for safety, and then having relocatables outside of the brick and mortar footprint that school was designed for, one cafeteria, one gym, one music space, etc., then it becomes a management issue. And the other piece that I throw in is some of the modulars that we have, the larger one at Howard High that continues to come to mind, they have a self-contained bathroom within those. The other ones that we have N of 1 or 2, the young people then have to develop, the teachers and staff have to develop a process where they're coming inside the building in the elements of rain, snow, etc., that we won't have this week. And it creates me a concern that I have my children that are vulnerable. And I witness this all the time. I am in schools constantly where they have great management strategies. Still my child, my kids, are walking from a outside relocatable inside to use the restroom, and I don't like that.
Right, so in the larger sense, maybe that would be a better approach than talking about getting rid of them all, at least making them more self-contained somehow or another, with bathrooms and that sort of thing, so that the kids would be outside between classes, say in high school, but not during classes as much.
But again, I appreciate the thought, and we've gone down every path. Each one of our school sites presents differently in terms of topography, geography, et cetera, and septic systems. So we have to worry about septic availability. We have to look about usable land in terms of where we can place them. And if you remember, again, I go back to my arrival, there was a lot of great concern at Manor Woods. And so I allocated additional relocatables, and we addressed that I can't put any more there because of the strain on the septic system as well as then usable land. So it's not just as simple as self-contained. And then the other prong of this is, and you have to consider all of these, I also have to worry about fire and safety. That I can't, some folk have asked about, cordoning them off and putting them in a different location and a variety of things. I have to be very acutely aware of fire safety and evacuations and not isolating them for prevention of evacuation.
Right, as a member of the Commission on School Safety, I really appreciate it. Can I one, this was not going to be a popular question. Thank you very much. This is not going to be a popular question, but from anecdotal experience, I know that we talk about communities' dedication to a school, and when you redistrict, the danger of the difficulty that some parents and students feel. But I've taught at 2 brand new high schools in Howard County, and my observation was in a few years, people attach themselves to the new school quite well. Is there any studies about how long it takes for that adjustment period to take place? And as long as we're not flipping kids back and forth like we did in Hawthorne for a while there, it probably works out pretty well.
Yeah.
But I'm asking.
Well, I asked you to kind of review for your pleasure reading Policy 6010.
On Monday's snow day.
Please, yes. I will give you my personal email, and we can dialogue back and forth in a shared conversation. I would appreciate that. And I'll give you feedback as well. Understand that policy talks about we shouldn't move children so many different times based upon the developmental level. We try to attend to the emotional well-being, and my philosophy as an educator is the social emotional well-being of our students and staff. So understanding that, but I do believe that there's great resiliency in our young people if that transition is done properly. So when I talk about that year-long process, one of the issues is, for example, when we opened the new Hanover Hills, I appointed that principal in February. During December, they started in February, and they started building community. They started visiting the school. They started making a connection and bonding with the children who would be going to that process. I've opened 2 new schools personally in 2 different districts, and great attention to community building and bringing it together, and it actually becomes a wonderful celebration. It's managing that process of the allegiance to certain schools, which I know in Howard County is great. And I've lived through this also as a parent, as a resident of Howard County, and how tough that can be on community. But the issue is balancing out all of those issues, which we do well, tending to the emotional well-being of our young people during those times. We have to still look at what we have in terms of capacity. So I'm going to say as we look at wrapping up here, I'm sure, I still want, with this conversation with our board, that they'll be having that discussion. I introduced a feasibility study that moved 8,800 kids. And at the end of the day, we're going to have to look at that again as a starting point as we move forward to address this incredible growth of which we have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Morano, I think someone said we had about 58,000 students in the school system now. Is that this year?
That is correct, September 30th.
How many seats do we have in the school system? So I guess my question is, where can I find how many empty seats we have in the school system that we're not utilizing?
Empty seats. And that's in the feasibility study.
Within the official capacities. I would think you would be able to find it in the APFO chart, right? Mine is too small to read. Thank you, Mr. Brown. But if you could just locate that number while we're talking, that would be great.
Perfect.
Dr. Monroe, remind us when you introduced the redistricting plan to move 8,800 students.
So I assumed the position on May 2nd, 2017, remember it vividly. And within the month of June, May, June of that year, I introduced that because started all the AAC meetings. I remember in the heat of the summer having those meetings, and then in August creating a number of community concern where protesters would follow me everywhere I went during that period of time. So within the first 2-3 months of my administration as superintendent.
And why did you, or the board, eventually back off of that?
I'd have to say for a variety of reasons. With that, it was my recommendation, and then the input from the community created a lot of consideration and concern, and then the guidance to introduce programs to give that an opportunity to do so. All of those variables, I think, played in there, and so I find myself going back to that lull period, but I'm resurrecting my concern today that I have nothing else at my disposal except the re-examination of a very robust redistricting that solves this problem once and for all, and I'm greatly concerned.
But it won't solve it once and for all.
True, let me back
It
up.
will solve it for a period of time.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
And may I add, if I may, Delegate Watson, there is concern, and it's in the narrative, and I've actually said it, regarding the fact that redistricting now, and then the timeline, and then opening a new high school, 2023, that we may have to redistrict twice. I'm moving away from that conversation because there are variables that could affect that in the meantime. So I think right now that the new board needs to look at this with a very open set of eyes to address the fact to redistrict now because it's coming to more than a crisis for me. And if we have to redistrict a second time, we have to do that.
But you should be able to plan so that you're not redistricting the same children twice.
I would say we should be. I'll just leave it at that.
Or handle it with exceptions.
I would say yes.
Okay. Howard High School. How many portables does it have?
It's one structural modular, and how many classrooms? 23 classrooms.
Because in the book, I counted that it was 7 in the...
We'll double check the count, but I think that the key there, Ms. Dr. Washington, is the fact that you do have a non-modular classroom, so you know maybe one structure has 9 classrooms.
Yeah.
So you have a few of those there.
So tell me again, how many modular classrooms do we have at Howard High School?
Modular classrooms, you can count real quick. But I know we have 23 actual classrooms, so if I take that 9, then it must be at least around 12.
So you have 23 modular classrooms, that's your answer, right?
6 individuals on 1 module? Okay. 6 individuals on 1 module, 1 9.
The classrooms outside of the building that are not brick and mortar are 23?
Classrooms inside that module. Actual classrooms, remember, if there's 9 classrooms in that modular, I'm counting each of those classrooms separately.
Right, does that attach to the building?
No, it's off from the
Okay. So you have 23 classrooms outside of brick and mortar at Howard High School?
Yes, ma'am.
So the capacity at Howard High School is rated as what?
Was it 130?
It's on the chart, it's 130.
Well, I mean, how many? 1420.
Okay.
And the number of students is how many? Okay. I just cannot accept that for Howard High School. First of all, many of the families go there, also with District 12, I believe. It's just completely unacceptable for so many reasons. And I do not understand how the Board of Education got itself in this position at Howard High School. I know that you believe that it's manageable, and you have great staff there, and you're adding resources. But to me, that seems like a major crisis that can't wait for 2021 or 2022. Did you come up with the number? The total number? Yeah.
Can we get that on? We'll send that to you.
It's a pretty important point, though.
We'll get it. We're trying to get some of the other questions as well. So I think we'll get that by the end of this.
Okay. All I'll say is this. On redistricting, I was a board member for 4 years. I know what the board members go through when they have to make those decisions. It's not easy. When I was on the board, we redistricted every year for 4 years. So I did it 4 times. I redistricted my own children twice and my sister's children once, which was even worse than my own children. and we always make those decisions right before Thanksgiving. So we had a lovely Thanksgiving dinner that year. But I heard all of the arguments from parents and families, and I felt their emotions. My children were in the same age ranges. Many families came back later and said, after they were redistricted, we love our new school. My child is thriving. this is a process that happens in Howard County that can be handled properly, that can respect the use of taxpayer dollars, because we can't just continue to build schools and never move children around. It's the way it's done, and I'm confident that you will make sure that you go through a good process that respects all of the voices. But I just think it's really important that everybody think about the common good. Howard High School is not being served right now.
You could pass this for page 20.
And the seat count is 56.
Okay, so we have 58,000 students and 56.
They don't count.
Right, but how many empty seats do you have?
0. I had,
No.
hold on. Let's check the number.
So, just to clarify, I think the question Delegate Watson is asking is that if you look at other high schools throughout the county, there are empty seats at
Understood.
several of them, correct? So what is the grand total of empty seats if you add up all of those schools that are currently under capacity? Is that your question?
Understood your question, but like I said, so that everybody's not just rushing, let's double check the numbers so we can make sure we give you an accurate number. You understand your question, yes, ma'am?
Dr. Montreal, I want to get back to our earlier conversation. I forgot to ask part of this. So you had said for 10 years, it's roughly $2 billion would be for every possible thing that you want to do. Get rid of relocatables, build new schools, catch up with your deferred maintenance. But what I didn't ask was, what does redistricting do then? So if you're adequately filling the available seats, regardless of whether they're relocatable or open in schools, what does that do to that number? Is it still $2 billion, or is it somewhat less than $2 billion?
Sorry to answer no question. I think earlier we did say that that number still included the process, so basically, even if we do district, there's still going to be a number that's going to be close to that. But we can double check to make sure how that be effective, but it's still going to be close because we still need those seats. Even if we district, we still need a number of seats.
So is there anything that shows us your sort of school board, and I know that there's a very expensive thing, but over that 10 years, what that number is per year student growth? I mean, is it because you're taking relocatables away, or is it because you're getting that many new students into the system every year to warrant a new school?
You're getting those, as I said, you're growing by 800 to 1,000 kids a year, so you're getting kids. It's the actual kids.
Okay. Even with these schools being closed under the new APFO charts?
Because that's the one I was like, that's just the number of kids that's still growing at that rate.
Thank you.
I want to thank you very much. Thank you, and I'm sure that you will be contacted for some additional questions. But we're going to go ahead to our next meeting.
Can I just say one final thing? Thank you for your time. I look forward to the dialogue because this is a collaborative process where all of us are involved in all of our constituencies. And just say no to snow. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We're next going to have the Administration Director of Policy and Programs, Carl DiLorenzo. Thank you.
see you.
Everybody wants to get up and stretch. Stretch everybody up. Hands. All right. Reach. Stretch. There we go. All right. Deep breaths in and out.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Carl G. Lorenzo, with Howard County Administration. I'm here to present to you today some data regarding school construction funding. So we spoke about APFO this morning. We spoke with the school system about redistricting and capacity. Really, financing school construction is at the heart of Delegate Atterbury's bill, which is why we're here this morning. So I'll be providing you with some historical data on the funding sources used to finance school construction and some strategies for going forward. I gave you the PowerPoint presentation that's shown up on the screen. Also, for context, it's important to mention that, excuse me, I staffed the 2015 Agricultural Facilities Task Force, so I have some knowledge on that area as well if you have any questions. I will start with kind of the big picture of how school construction is funded in Howard County. There are primarily two funding sources, state and county funding. The graph that I'm providing to you shows historical funding for school construction going back to fiscal year 2016. As you can see, the majority of school construction funding comes from county-issued general obligation bonds, which are serviced with general funds. State aid to school construction comprises the second largest category. The trend line indicates that in the early 2010s up to 2018, the county's been receiving approximately $20 to $35 million per year. The amount went down in FY19 to a little under $9 million. The request, which is before the county right now for fiscal year 2020, that request has grown to back up to $16 million. You'll see the two smaller segments of school construction funding being the transfer tax and the school facility surcharge. The transfer tax is an appropriation to the school system from the county for transfer tax receipts that are collected. There's an important distinction that I'd like to make about the school facility surcharge, which is really what's before you today in Delegate Atterbury's bill. The surcharge that is collected by the county is not directly appropriated to the school system. Instead, the county issues education bonds periodically, and the surcharge backs the debt on those education bonds. So it's an important distinction to make, because I don't want there to be the takeaway that whatever the surcharge collection is gets appropriated annually to fund school construction. That's not the case. The county will periodically issue education bonds to finance school construction, and the surcharge revenue that comes in is used to support that debt.
So let me just stop right there. So what are the implications of that? Are there times when it is inadequate? Is there times that we have to go in under power? What is the significance?
So I'll get to that later on in the presentation, but essentially the implications of that is that it does not represent a steady stream of revenue in for school construction. There will be a period of time where we may issue a large amount of bonds and then not be able to issue bonds for a number of years because the surcharge revenue coming in is not adequate to support debt coverage on future bond issuances. So it's a very kind of staggered and inconsistent funding source for school construction. Even though the surcharge revenue is steady every year, the amount of bonds we can issue to finance school construction as a result are not steady every year, because we have to take into account how much debt the surcharge can accommodate. Yes?
So is the steadiest form of revenue being generated from the transfer tax?
The transfer tax is a steady form of revenue to the county, yes.
Let's see the least fluctuation in that.
There's the least, that does have the least fluctuation, is the transfer tax. It's a smaller percentage of the whole, but it is a steady flow. roughly 80 to 90% of the school construction funding comes from general obligation bonds that the county issues in state aid. For the purposes of this presentation today, though, and to Delegate Atterbury's bill, we're just talking about the surcharge, and we're talking about the surcharge, which is the little orange sliver, and I am bringing the transfer tax into the discussion today, just so you can see how it compares, and also the transfer tax really is what touches on some of the data that was presented earlier with respect to resales, because that's when transfer tax receipts are kind of prompted. So, as I indicated,
I'm sorry, can you just clarify the blue bars?
that's county general obligation bonds that are issued to finance school construction. Those are backed with county general fund dollars. So I told you that I'd be discussing two of our tax revenue sources for school construction today. The first is the school facility surcharge, which is being proposed in Delegate Atterbury's bill. Kind of the state term, we in Howard County call it a school facility surcharge, but it is really defined in state terms as an excise tax, so I may be using those terms interchangeably. The chart before you shows the an excise, the excise tax, the school facility surcharge, is a fee that is imposed on a developer of a new housing unit. So there is a formula for calculating that fee. But that is essentially what the collection is. Thank you for asking.
And it is remitted when the unit is sold, or when the unit is built, or when is it remitted?
It is remitted when the unit is built.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So they have the nice figures, but they're large ones. Is there any way to sort of average them per capita or per student so that we can get a sense of size and the last column?
Yeah, I tried to do that with the last column, but what I'll say is with the second column, which gives the flat rate, that is essentially what the per capita, that's not a per capita rate, that is a per unit rate, per residential unit. So I could do some per capita calculations and see if it reveals anything interesting.
We're smaller, so
We are
looking
small.
at the total revenue, because this is what we always hear, is that we're comparing apples and oranges, there are different fees all over the place, and so what are we actually drawing in per student,
Right.
for example?
So I think the apples to apples comparison really comes in the second column, the actual flat rate itself. So for example, Montgomery County, it charges an excise tax for schools at a rate of $23,062 per residential unit. Quantitatively, or in the aggregate, that generates approximately $34 million for Montgomery County in FY18. These are all the counties that impose a school-related excise tax. As you can see, Howard County is near the bottom of that list. Howard County is also one of only 3 jurisdictions in the state that sets its surcharge at a per square foot basis. That's what I did was I just assumed a 2,000 square foot dwelling unit at the current rate, which is $1.32 per square foot, to give you some context as to how much typically the county collects per unit residential construction. So it's approximately $2,600 per unit. Obviously, if it's a 3,000 square foot home, you would increase it by another $1,300. So we are considerably less than the other jurisdictions nearby in proximity to Maryland.
Just to clarify again, if we look in that fourth column, look at Queen Anne's, so they're charging a higher rate. They collect more, but it comes out to 1.8 versus 6.2.
Fewer
That
units.
is a per capita, so it's per unit.
That's a per unit calculation. So the rate is $10,580. The per square foot rate is $529. So I could do backwards math to determine how many units we're talking. I guess I could have added that column, like number of units in each. I can go back and do that.
And just even a list of what their population is.
Sure.
So we can do it per capita, see what we're talking about.
Another important kind of footnote to this chart, this is only school-related excise taxes, so a number of counties impose additional excise taxes. For example, Howard County has a building excise tax which finances roads. A few other jurisdictions have public safety excise taxes. Those were excluded from this calculation. I just wanted to isolate the school excise tax figure.
So you have that information somewhere?
I do know what other counties' excise taxes are, what Howard County's excise tax is for roads, how much that brings in revenue. I can provide that information.
So it's the cost per county of an additional unit. Can you make that calculation?
Yes.
Given all the various excise taxes that they may be subject to?
Yes, that's right. So I would essentially, if I carry this chart out further, I would have a school rate, I would have a roads rate, I would have a public safety rate, if applicable, and then again apply it on a per unit basis.
Except, I'm sorry, for instance, what's not up there, as you said, the excise tax, the per building excise tax is different in this residential unit. It's not being charged on the same units.
It is. So a unit in Howard County gets imposed 2 excise taxes. It gets imposed a surcharge, which is school excise tax, and it gets imposed a roads, which is the building excise tax.
Is it in both cases, on both commercial and residential, or is one only residential and one is both commercial and residential?
The school, a residential unit is imposed both the school excise tax and the roads excise tax. A commercial unit, I think, is only imposed the roads excise tax.
Okay.
Correct. I had something else on this. Okay. So that's some background on our school surcharge. With respect to our transfer tax rate in the county, the highest rate in the state. Okay, I'm sorry. Transfer tax is collected at the sale of a residential property. So typically, it's typically collected when an individual or when a homeowner closes on a home, and it's essentially an exchange of property, and the state gives the county's authority to impose a transfer tax on the transfer of property from one homeowner to another.
And a new unit gets both?
A new unit does get imposed a transfer tax. So transfer taxes get imposed on sales of existing homes and acquisition of new homes. The highest transfer tax rate in the state is Baltimore City at 1.5%, which is calculated as 1.5% of the sale price of that property. Howard County's transfer tax rate is 1%, which sits us at the third highest transfer tax rate in the state. Another important distinction about Howard County's transfer tax rate is the transfer tax distribution, which is set by state law, allocates transfer tax funding into 4 primary pots. The first pot is school construction, which receives 25% of the transfer tax receipts. Recreation and Parks, Department of Recreation and Parks receives 25%. Agricultural land preservation receives 25%. The Department of Housing's Community Renewal Fund receives 1/8%, and Department of Fire and Rescue Services also receive 1/8%. So in FY18, that resulted, there was a total of $38 million in transfer tax collections, the distribution of which is $9.5 million for school construction, recreation and parks, and agricultural land preservation, for approximately $4.5 million for community renewal and Department of Fire and Rescue Services.
So does that, the school construction money, does that go into the same place, or does it go into the same place as the excise, or does it go in?
No, so the transfer tax revenue that's received for school construction is treated as general fund dollars. That's appropriated to the school system for school construction. And one other point I wanted to make on the previous slide, the surcharge rate is set by the state. The county has the authority to set its own road excise tax rate. The county cannot change its school surcharge rate. That's a state has the ability to do that, which is why we're here today. But the county does have the ability to set its own roads excise tax.
Just a follow-up on Senator Grisani's question. The excise tax, the school facility surcharge, you said is used to back bonds for school construction.
Correct.
But the transfer tax dedicated to school construction is just budgeted as cash?
Correct.
Is there anything stopping the county from using that to back bonds?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Not that I'm aware of. It's just been a policy decision in the past to limit the backing of the bonds with the surcharge.
Okay.
So the next slide, the next graph is intended to show what transfer tax and surcharge collections have been over the last 15 years. I will say the surcharge was adopted in fiscal year 2005, so that's as far back as I go with this graph. You'll see that the surcharge, which is reflected in the orange line, the county's been collecting revenue at a rate of approximately $6 million since its inception. There was a slight dip in the late 2000s due to the recession. Similarly with the transfer tax, which is the green line, the portion dedicated to school construction has averaged between $8 and $10 million over the last 13 years. The total of the two is reflected in the black line. So again, you see we're pretty much collecting the same amount of revenue in fiscal year 2018 that we had collected in 2005, a little over 14 million versus a little under 16 million with the exception of the recession in the late 2000s.
And neither of those rates have changed at that time, so this is same study rate in 2005 as again for both the transfer.
Correct. The only change that I want to point out with the surcharge is the county does have the ability to adjust it for inflation on an annual basis. So when the rate was set in 2005, it was set at $1 per square foot. Now with inflation over the last 13 years, we're now at $1.32 per square foot. But that is the only adjustment the county can make. So the next chart is my feeble attempt to compete with Mr. Brown on how much data I can put on a slide. But I will just highlight what the important columns are here. This indicates what the surcharge revenue, how the surcharge revenue is being appropriated to satisfy debt service. So I'll take the first year as an example. In 2005, our first year collecting surcharge revenue, we collected approximately $6 million. As you see in 2000, and obviously there were no bonds to debt to service in 2005. In 2006, the actual revenue collected was an additional $6.8 million. Again, there was no debt to service in 2006, so the cumulative account balance was $12.7 million. And with every year thereafter, the formula is you add the beginning balance, which is 12.7, you add that to the actual revenue collected for the year, and you subtract it from the debt service. So in 2007, the carryover balance is $12.7 million. New revenue received in fiscal year 2007 was $6.4 million. The debt service on bonds that had been issued were $2.2 million, so that results in an ending balance of 16.9, and then that formula kind of carries through. You'll see, if you look at the bonds sold category, you'll see what I was referring to as the kind of inconsistent way in which we issue bonds to finance school construction in Howard County, specifically the education bonds, not GO bonds. So the county did a significant issuance in the first year that it was able to. It issued $31 million in education bonds. The subsequent year it issued $27 million, $16 million. Now, as you kind of see, in the early 2010s, we were able to issue fewer and fewer bonds. And I apologize, these dollars are not in millions, they're in actuals. So that's just a correction that I just noticed on the slide.
So when you said they were able to issue, as opposed to they chose to issue, are you saying our ability with this surcharge to fund the debt has impacted the decision, or they just didn't want the money?
The first thing that you said, the amount of surcharge available really prompts how much debt can be supported, how many bonds can be issued. So the primary question, really the takeaway from this slide is, and as you can see, the ending balance is declining. And so I only wanted to show you actual figures, but if we were to look at projections for future years, we're going to see that eventually the surcharge will wind up in negative, in the out years. And so the reason why I show this, and the question that I think we all have to ask ourselves is, with an increase in the surcharge, and I think it's a further analysis that we have to do, how much of that increase will go to support past debt, and how much of it can be used to leverage new debt? So that is really an important next step in the analysis that I think needs to occur based on the data that we've examined this past week.
And is it a reasonable assumption, since the ending balance is positive, that we are meeting our debt service obligations?
We're meeting our debt service obligations, but as you can see, we're not able to issue nearly the level of bonds that we've been able to issue, say, 13, 12, 11 years ago.
13-year, 7-year bonds? What's the life on the bonds?
I have to check. I'll find out for you.
So the maximum, we're issuing the maximum number of bonds that we can, limited by the fact that our surcharge is what it is, and we have to pay the debt service.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So that's not a policy decision.
No, it's driven by fiscal. It's driven by the fiscal reality of the balance in the surcharge fund.
So are the excise tax backed bonds are specifically limited to excise tax revenue, so we're limited in how many we can issue based on that projected.
Right, so we have to show that we have enough. When we issue the bonds, we have to show bondholders that we have enough backing to pay their debt and honor their debt. And so we basically use surcharge. It's like a revenue bond, right? We use the surcharge revenue to cover the debt, and we have to show bondholders that we have the revenue coming in to support it. So we would be able to get bond buyers or issue bonds if we weren't able to show that we had revenue to pay them back, essentially.
And so the difference is if we don't have enough to issue additional excise tax backed bonds, then we fill in with GO bonds.
Correct. So let's say we take no action here, and in the future years we're going to have kind of a negative balance. What we'd have to do is we'd have to go into the general fund to pay off that debt, or issue general obligation bonds as an alternative.
As a bond choice, is there a difference in our obligation? Are they lower interest, higher interest?
I have to check on what the actual rates are, how those bonds are actually structured. I don't know a lot about them, but I can find out more for you.
I thought, following up on Delegate Feldmark's question, you could theoretically use the transfer tax
Yes.
to back
Yes.
additional.
I would have to look at how the underwriting is structured to see what revenue sources can be used. When we issue different types of bonds, there are usually specific funding sources that the backing can come from. So I don't want to say definitively that we can use the transfer tax. I don't know how the underwriting was done, but I will check on that for you, and if we can use transfer tax to pay that off. So the next, so my last few slides really go into strategies to address what looks to be like a structural imbalance, both in what the county collects and what the school system indicates it needs for school construction financing over the next decade or so. What I did here, and I'm looking at this historically, is I took the actual appropriations by funding source for school construction funding, and I'm assuming, kind of based on the dialogue that we heard today and other conversations with the school system, that if we were to achieve a goal of providing the school system with $100 million a year annually in school construction funding, where our gap is, right? And so by going back the last 4 years, and this would be consistent, this would be steady even if I went back prior, typically the school system receives between $60 and $80 million annually to finance school construction. If we want to use $100 million annually as a benchmark or a goal, we fall about $20 to $35 million short as a county in funding school construction, assuming that that need can be verified of 100 million per year. And it may be that what the superintendent was referring to about a cumulative need going forward, this could be a cumulative effect of that need growing. I think we'd have to look into that more. But I think we can expect that without any significant changes in funding streams, that we will see this kind of imbalance carrying forward in future years.
Going back a little bit, when we saw that sudden dip in the state funding last year, is that due to a change in formula or a change in our, what was that due to? And is that something we can anticipate going forward?
So that's a very good question. I don't know what, I think that's a question for the school system. The school system generates its state ask every year for school construction. And last year seemed to be like an anomaly, where it had typically been in the $20 million range. Last year it went down to 8. This coming year's request is in the teens. So I'm not sure who dictates those figures. I'm not sure if it's the school system's request. I'm not sure if it's what the state ultimately decides to fund of the school system's request. So I don't know how the state aid portion is arrived at.
Let me interrupt for a second. Can someone answer that question? Stay there.
In response, in years past, it also is based on the number of eligible projects at the time. I know in years past, when we were doing a lot of construction at the time, we would add a bigger ask because we had a bigger volume of projects.
Eligible meaning that we're able to fund them, or eligible meaning that
eligible for state participation in the actual projects, based off of what we talked about earlier in terms of how the state participates in the formula. What it comes down to the fact that we had a low law, I think about, like you said, I think we had like $6 million last year or something like that, was small. Or $8 million is because we didn't have projects that were far enough along, design-wise, eligible-wise.
So not shovel-ready.
Exactly, to be able to ask.
So what's required? Shovel-ready, matching funds, forward funding, what's required?
Of course you need matching funds, but also at the same time, you have to be far enough in the design and have enough projects that are actually eligible by their calculations, enrollment count, by eligible area for them to participate in, meaning, how much is eligible based off of the state criteria of how long have they been, and how long have they been since they touched the facility. Most cases, a lot of times, it has to be like a 16-year period before they'll come back.
Okay.
So when we have projects that have not reached that criteria, things like that, it puts a little bit of a lull there at that time.
So does that get to the question that the superintendent raised earlier, the point he made earlier, that the state requirements favor a new school construction because of capacity over new school construction because of aging infrastructure?
I wouldn't quite say that. I think basically what it comes down to is it comes down to just basically, once again, it's just the size of the ask of eligibility at the time. As you'll see in our budget that we presented, that I think you have in your binder, that ask is about to go way up because of the projects, with the Tower Spring project, with the Hammond project, with the new school project. We now have projects that are eligible for that, and that ask will be considerably higher in the next few years.
But I guess I'm trying to track down so is the problem that we're as a county or as the school system aren't getting the projects ready, or is it how it's being defined by the state? I'm not sure. I don't know if that's a question or just sort of something for us to figure out, but do you have an answer to that? I mean, why?
It wasn't a question.
Why? Because sort of, if you didn't know any of the rest of the details, it'd be disappointing that the school system didn't ask for more money. But what is preventing us from getting those? Why aren't they ready?
I think the biggest reason, and this kind of goes back to a couple of things that I said earlier, is number one, projects based off of capacity, based off of systemic. That's one.
Wait, can I just ask you a question based on that? So that we know we have capacity issues. So why don't we have requests that address capacity issues? Actually, I was going to go back to that in a second, but when you go to do a Talbot Springs, I guess originally it wasn't a capacity, or Hammond High School, you didn't ask for a capacity increase. Why don't you ask, there must be something that's limiting, and I just don't understand what that is.
Well-
We know we have a capacity issue in the county.
Well, I think one of the things that you have to understand again is how, again, it comes down to the state formula. When they look at what they'll basically participate in, it's based off what I'll call maximum allowable area. So that goes with enrollment, and as sets a product with enrollment, and also a product of eligible state area, or I guess I would say area per student. With that being the case, and a lot of our older projects, again, it's the time we touch those projects. They're not, for lack of a better word, to a date where they will participate, which means it really falls more on the local side of their participation. So since we can't generate that at the time, it kind of goes into that. I can give you more detail exactly. I'll go back
I'm
and
going
take
to
a look
jump in.
for you.
I'm going to jump in. And this is great questions for you, Delegate Rossum, now that you're a member of the Appropriations Committee. I mean, there's a lot of background on this that goes over many years and will continue. And the way in which the Interagency Committee on School Construction deals with these questions, and the new director there and the new process. So I think a lot of that, there are a lot of components to this, probably too much and too in the weeds for this, but nonetheless important questions.
Yes.
And I think you'll be diving right into that very
Yeah,
soon.
and I'm not as familiar as you are with that process, but I guess part of my question going forward is whether the school system can adjust anything to meet those criteria,
That's a
or
great
whether,
yeah, I think it's a great
I
question.
understand that they're changing criteria,
Yep.
and I've seen some of that, but not.
We're going to be dealing with this for the next couple of years through a lot of discussion in the appropriation process. The Kerwin Commission and what came out of the previous construction commission that was done the year before. So lots going on and a lot of in-depth. Thank you.
And thank you, Senator Brown. And we are adjusting as those changes come through.
So I just have one slide left, and it really kind of gets to the heart of the discussion. What strategies do we have to kind of revamp revenue streams to finance school construction? So what I did here was really just provide you with some I will say some benchmark calculations to show what may happen under different scenarios. I will say that the calculations that I did, I'll qualify this by saying that they were not sensitivity tested, meaning I did not account for, I did not control for any changes in development patterns given the new APFO laws. I did not kind of account for any unique or outlier demographic phenomenon, so and I kept the dollars, I did not adjust the dollars. So what I wanted to do was show what would happen, a rough calculation of what would happen under Delegate Atterbury's bill, which with the increase to $4 per square foot under Delegate Atterbury's bill, our projections show that it would have the potential to generate an additional $13 million annually for school construction. Additionally, this is additional in addition to the six that we collect right now. So that, like I mentioned earlier, that we'll have to do further analysis to determine if that would be used to kind of finance previous debt or if that can be used to issue new debt. Also, I wanted to kind of look at what would happen if we adjusted our transfer tax rate. So currently I said that Howard County's transfer tax rate is 1%. If we were to increase the transfer tax rate by a quarter, for example, that has the potential to increase revenue collection by approximately $2 million per year. Again, not controlling for other external factors. Also, what I wanted to do was show what would happen, look at what would happen if we redistributed our transfer tax. So remember when I indicated that school construction receives a quarter of our transfer tax? What would happen if we redistributed transfer tax and increased by an eighth the amount that school construction gets? That has the potential to generate an additional $5 million per year. So those are kind of county-controlled calculations on the surcharge and the transfer tax, but there are other factors that I think we should consider when contemplating which direction to go. What changes are happening to our state aid formula? You know, do we expect that the county will kind of correct any imbalances, or does the state have any responsibility or role to play in correcting those imbalances? Also, if we were to redistribute the transfer tax, we want to make sure that we have adequate fund balances in those other funds. We don't want to put another recipient of the transfer tax's budget in jeopardy by redistributing more of it to school construction. I mentioned future bonding capacity with the surcharge increase. How many new education bonds could we issue under this plan? And also I mentioned new APFO regulations have the potential to alter residential development patterns in the county. The county is currently doing a fiscal impact study, which Mr. Barno referenced, and so that may factor into surcharge and transfer tax collections going forward. So I know that there's a lot on this slide, and it's really forward-thinking and strategic, so I just wanted to throw these ideas out.
The largest number up there is 13 million.
Correct.
But I think in a previous slide, we saw that 25% of the proposed new development would go forward with the existing APFO, or with the new APFO constraints. So that would mean
That number is
a lot.
correct, which is why I didn't test for that.
Understood. But so it could conceivably be 1/4 of that.
Possibly, yes.
So, in a related issue, that money to be used to theoretically, let's just say it's going to be used for debt service.
Yes.
Could you give us an indication of how much we needed for debt service in order to accommodate, given that a 10-year time frame, and I don't know what number we're going to pick here, $1 billion or $2 billion, but maybe both from a sensitivity analysis perspective, what we would need to generate to cover that.
The request, the school system's like $1 billion request. Or
Correct.
$2 billion request.
Correct. Also considering, that there's a certain amount that obviously we have a historical perspective on that comes through GO and state funding. So how much more needs to be generated for debt service?
How much more needs to be generated for debt service just on education bonds?
To get
General obligation is
to get there. Yeah.
to get there.
Yeah.
So if we were to, I guess what you're asking is, if we were to look to the surcharge to solve the deficit.
Not necessarily the surcharge, it's really just a number. It's a dollar figure that it would take.
Got it.
Yep.
And to piggyback on that, I think it'd be really valuable to see, with no changes, what the maintenance buffer on the bonds are for the next 10 years.
Yes, I have that.
So we can factor that in, as you sell new bonds, how does that maintenance affect what you can actually get? Because there's a trade-off there.
That's right. We have to satisfy old obligations before we can take on new obligations. So
Pivoting just a little, you have these nice large figures up here. Have we looked forward at all what this might
really hypothetical.
Right. I'm going to hold you to it. But are we looking at all what this might do to general affordability of new housing in Howard County?
So I think no, I have not factored that in. Okay. So yes, obviously, right, there's externalities that occur when you take these kinds of actions. What will this do to home prices? What will this do to kind of purchasing power? What will this do to demand? I have not factored in any of those considerations. Perhaps the fiscal impact study may do that somewhat. That's why I really emphasize this is not kind of tested as a regression with any control variables.
I was guessing not. It's a good thing for us to be thinking about.
And I think you're right, Delegate. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to go. I have another obligation that I've got to get to and finish up ably here. I know that there are people who are out there that have strong opinions on that, the effects of this and whether or not it truly will increase the cost of housing and to what degree it is. We're happy to hear that, and I'm speaking to the audience in general at this point. I know that there are people here from the Housing Commission. I know there are citizens here who have perspectives on that, and I think as I'm leaving, I just want to make sure that people know that this is really, I appreciate everyone who's been here, everybody, all the citizens who've come, the organizations, that you're sharing in this process is important to us. And this is, I wouldn't say it's the beginning, because it's been going on forever, but it's certainly an important point in the process, and there's plenty more opportunity to participate in terms of providing us your input, so certainly feel free to do that, and I thank you all very much. So, Madam Chair?
Senator Lamb.
Thank you. So option 3 that you're listing up there under strategies, that's not actually any new revenue, right? That's just a
redistributing existing revenue. That's why I say we have to look at what the funding balances are in those other areas that are receiving transfer tax
to
revenue.
affect the others.
Correct.
Okay. And then, you're showing options 1 and 2 where there's a surcharge increase or transfer tax increase. Transfer tax only applies to existing homes being sold, right? And that's actually where the largest number of new students are coming from, right?
Well, transfer tax is also imposed on new development as well, but also existing. Yes. So obviously with APFO, APFO doesn't impact resale activity. So there would be less of a change with any change in APFO to the transfer tax collection than there would be to the surcharge collection.
Right, okay.
So, I have a couple of questions, or at least a few parts. Talking about what portion of the new revenue generated by the potential increase in the surcharge might have to go to pay existing debt service. I just want to clarify, is that a gap based on the APFO changes? I mean, bonds should have theoretically had revenue to back them. So are we seeing, what's the basis for the shortfall if those bonds were properly underwritten?
I'll have to talk with our Department of Finance and our budget department to determine what factors they've included in that out-year cash flow. I don't know if it factors in new APFO regulations or not, so I'll find out for you.
And I guess, right, if it doesn't, what is the cause of the shortfall? I mean, there shouldn't be a shortfall in revenue unless something changed that was unanticipated.
Right, the only change that's anticipated is the new APFO regulations. So I'll double check that the kind of cash flow model for our surcharge, where it shows deficits in the out years, what that deficit is attributed to. I'll double check for you.
Okay, and then, so the potential impact of slowing development is that this revenue decreases and a larger portion of it would need to be dedicated to existing debt service as opposed to new construction.
Correct.
In the urban analytics study that's being done, that's just looking at the impact of the APFO legislation, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it doesn't take into consideration any fee changes?
No, I don't believe we're communicating with the consultant to look at any changes to our rate structures. Is that right?
Right, but you could derive from that report, you could look at what impact would have on that.
Okay.
So it would be a baseline study, but it'd be very valuable because then you can say, okay, what if we tweak things? How would it impact?
Okay, all right, thank you.
So I'm assuming that your second and third bullets are not, and that they're separate, right?
They're isolated, so you can do both, essentially.
So if we increase the transfer tax to 1.5%, then we would have what, 4 million?
That goes up to, I did that calculation. If you were to increase it to 1.5, that would generate close to 5 million.
And then if you, sorry.
What's the base? What are we collecting now, transfer?
1%.
No, what is he?
For schools, we are collecting
6 million?
we are collecting anywhere between $8 and $10 million for schools. 9.5 was the figure that I provided for you here. So you would
My
add,
second question would be, then what does the second, not the third bullet go up to? If you reapportion it, so it's 37 point.
so if you were to increase it to 1.25, you'd add 2 million to the 9.5. If you were to increase it to 1.5, you would add about 5 million to the 9.5. If you were to just do the redistribution alone, you would add 5. But if you were to combine, you would just add. So let's say you were to do 1.5% and the redistribution, then that's an additional $10 million, roughly.
Is the school system able to come up and answer the question from earlier about number of open seats? Okay, well, I think I'll just go ahead with what I think. We were sort of looking at the numbers ourselves here, and we think, according to the documentation the school system provided, that we have about 800 or more open seats at the high school level, and possibly as much as 1,200 at the elementary school level and 350 at the middle school level. So while we're looking at the numbers of how we can fund this, we really have to look at our existing resources and how we need to use those resources that are already paid for. And I just want to go back to the point to help to understand, does the CIP, when we're talking 1.2 billion or 2 billion, big range, does the 1.2 billion include using the empty seats or not? And I think the school system said it does anticipate redistricting. But I don't know that that's the same answer as, are we going to be using the majority of those open seats? Because if we use those seats, we're talking about a lot less money we need in school construction. So I'd really like to get a better answer from the school system on this.
She's going to look at the question. Okay. Well, what do you want to say to that?
Thank you. My question's for you. Thanks for coming. So quick question. So the surcharge increase based on how the bill is drafted, 13 million. I'm just curious how you came up with that, because I had the folks down in Annapolis who based on a couple of different increases, and they came up with 23 million based on actual square footage and revenue generated in 2017. So I'm just wondering.
Mine's the addition. So cumulatively, so the 13 million that I show is just in addition to what we already collect. If you were to add in what we already collect, that gets up to like 19 or 20 million. So and if you want, I can look at the assumptions that the state's making and cross-check it with our assumptions to see, so we can get arrive at a closer estimate.
Numbers for us. Take those.
Outside, it's about 850 at the high school that are open, about 300-ish at the elementary, and I don't remember what it was for the middle school level. But to answer the overall question, does the capital budget include redistricting? The answer is yes. The feasibility, the answer is yes to that. And the feasibility explains that even with those capital improvements, our enrollment is still going to grow. So we're going to have to look at other capital improvements along the way. So redistricting is assumed in the capital budget, because we're not just going to build something and not fill it. So that it is assumed in the capital budget.
Would you send to the state delegation the number of open seats, how you calculated that?
Yeah, that's what I want to, I'll do a spreadsheet.
We came up with similar numbers on high school and middle school, but our number in elementary school was a lot different. Yeah, the middle school and elementary school numbers are...
Yeah, I'll do that.
But the high school, I think we all agree we have about 850 empty seats, majority of which are at Glen High School and Mary's Ridge High School.
And there are a few at Wildly.
Yeah, well, there are several there are 4 schools in our capacity, but we have almost 500 kids over capacity at Howard High School. I'd really like the Board of Education to seriously discuss how we're serving the needs at Howard High School.
I have a question. You said that the CIP involves redistricting, but you said it was due to new construction, but some of the CIP is for renovation.
Yes.
Is that, and so are you also considering the, you said that automatically when you build a new school, you have to redistrict because you have to district that school. Are we also talking about redistricting that would not be due to a new building being built? Is that included in CIP as well? Like just redistricting that seems necessary to fill some of the empty seats that Delegate Watson's talking about here?
That would be a discussion with the Board of Education, whether or not there would be a redistricting plan in the interim to fill the seats.
So but when you're considering, when you said that includes redistricting, you were talking about redistricting due to new construction.
Due to the seats available. So at Hammond, at the new high school, at Talbot Springs, at all the ones that are adding capacity, there are renovations and additions that would enable us to do some type of redistricting in those areas that they are.
So that is included?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. There are some other folks who are here, the delegation have any questions for Housing Commission, the Home Building Association, county council members here, people from the executive office and department of public works. So any questions?